This is Kevin Sullivan. You know me as the Taskmaster when I was with WCW and I was the head booker and wrestler. I'm going to give you a career interview for a company I've wanted to talk to for a long time. The Hannibal TV. It's the best promo out there. It's the best YouTube channel out there. And I'm proud to have finally been on it. Watch it.
So we are here with former WCW head booker Kevin Sullivan. He's booked numerous territories all around the world. He's a world famous wrestler, wrestled in WCW, Florida, all over the world. Was probably best known for his time in Florida and his Dungeon of Doom feud with Hulk Hogan. So we all know that you're from Boston. You talk about it a lot. What was your childhood like growing up there?
Well, my dad was a cop and we were in a real Irish neighborhood. So, you know, it was really a parochial neighborhood. So we did the normal things kids do, run the streets, play baseball, football, basketball. I wasn't great at basketball. And I wrestled amateur in the Y and the boys clubs. And looking back at it, I'm sure everybody looks back at their childhood and fond memories. So it was good. I had a good childhood.
Did you watch wrestling at all growing up?
Yeah, I did. And then it went off the air for a long time. When it was on the air, Killer Kowalski was the champion in Boston. The promoter was Paul Bowser. He was one of the original a year later, he was one of the original members. And it was a strange thing. They let him have his own championship for a while. And the guy that was the champion was also, in Boston, was also the champion in Montreal. Eddie Quinn had Montreal. So, and I believe the Tunnies still used the Montreal champion too. And it was very late when Montreal decided to use an NWA champion. Bowser caved in early and he turned the belt, his world belt, to the Eastern Heavyweight Championship. So, I mean, I got to see, when I was a kid, all the great ones: Buddy Rogers, Pat O'Connor, A-Boy Carpentier, Haystack Calhoun, Yukon Eric. To me, it was fascinating when I first went. And then it went off of TV in our area because Bowser died and Barnett came in with his partner Johnny Doyle, and they closed the territory at a sellout and went to Australia. And if Vern tried to run it without TV, it didn't do well. There was a small group that was Tony Santos, and Tony Santos produced the Garvins, Pat Patterson, Les Thatcher, Dusty started there. There was a local wrestler who worked for Bowser for years, Frank Scarpa. He was a big draw in California and Montreal and Boston. And the Santos used him as the United States heavyweight champion. So when I found out there was wrestling without television, I got to see Dominic Canucci, I got to see Argentina Rocca, I got to see Hans Schmidt, Bull Curry, and like I saw Rufus R. Jones when he was Hobo Brazil. They used to use a lot of like names, rip-off names, and there was a Bruno Sammartino and Bubby Rogers and guys like that. So it wasn't really well run, but he had no opposition because there wasn't two independent groups back then that I knew of anyway. So he had it all locked to himself, and I don't think he really wanted to get on TV. He got on TV for a short time in New Hampshire, and somehow those tapes went to Miami Beach, and Chris Dundee, who was Angelo Dundee's brother, who Angelo was Muhammad Ali's trainer, they broke away from the Florida office for a short period, and I'm going to look into that, how long they broke away, but they went from seeing the Briscoes and the Funks to seeing Little Abner and Golden Boy Dupree. So it was an unusual period.
And what was the crowds like? Obviously, probably when they went off TV, they weren't as big, but in general, how was the popularity of wrestling?
Well, when they had it on television, they had numerous sellouts at the Boston Gardens. Kowalski was very, very hot. They did an angle there that's been repeated. Pat Patterson did it with Pepper Gomez, but Killer Kowalski did a thing. Pepper Gomez had a cast iron stomach, and he didn't sell his stomach, and Kowalski, for weeks, guys climbed the ladder and jumped on Pepper's stomach. Nothing. Then Kowalski said he could do it, and he knee dropped him in the throat. They stretched Pepper out, and then you couldn't even get into the gardens. And the other thing was, the first match ever in Canada to go across country was Yukon Eric and Killer Kowalski, and that's the famous one where he knocked his ear off.
Yeah.
And they brought the rematch back to Boston, and you couldn't even get near the building. And then when it dropped off TV, they instead of going to Boston Gardens, they went to Boston Arena. And they, at first, were drawn. Dominic DeNucci wrestled that local guy I was telling you about, Frank Scappa. It was two Italians, and that was near the Italian neighborhood. So they drew 5,000 people, and it was good for a while. Then it slowly dropped off because he stopped bringing in talent. And then he went to the Boston Arena Annex, and he went from 5,000 to like 300 people. So it really died for a long time.
And I've heard you tell this story. There was one particular show you went to with the Sheik that was like a huge sellout. Could you just describe that for us?
Yeah, at that time, and I think most people at that time thought wrestling was not always on the level, and I was one of them, because the guys back then would do some tag team matches, some silly spots where a guy get caught in the ropes, they get the partner and use him as a battering ram, and so I knew it wasn't all real. But the first time I saw the Sheik, I actually thought the build would move with the energy, and he wrestled Spirisarion, who was like the number 2 or 3 babyface. And this is when Vince Sr. had it, and the Sheik destroyed him in like 3 minutes. It was like, whoa, what's wrong with this? And I thought, this guy has to be real. You know, here's the thing, the rest of it's fake, but this guy's real, you know, in his matches. So we've talked about it off camera that I still think people want to believe that somebody's a badass like Brock Lesnar is today. And, you know, I saw that Kurt just came back, and I think that match would sell out today, Kurt against Brock. You know, give Kurt a little run on TV before you put them together, and I think you'd have a great turnout.
And what was so special about the Sheik? He's obviously one of the greatest wrestlers ever, but in your opinion, what separated him?
He never broke kayfabe. He was the Sheik 24 hours a day. Jimmy Cornette talks about him and Bobby Fulton. When we were in the Great American Bash, I begged Dusty to use him in Detroit. And Dusty said, well, okay, we'll do it. And Jimmy and Bobby Fulton rather, saw the Sheik pull up. He waited till the first match. They pulled his limo into the building, and he got out with his caviar on and his 3-piece suit, but no shirt and a vest and all his gold. And he never talked to anybody. It was so crazy. He would have dinners at his house for the boys a couple of times a year, and the heels ate together and the baby faces ate in another room. And Terry Funk tells a story that he got arrested in Amarillo. He went to cash his check. He was making them believe that he didn't understand what was going on. He made a big commotion. They got scared and called the police, and the police took him out. He just was the Sheik 24 hours a day.
And I understand he was one of the most attacked wrestlers of all time. Did you ever witness anything like that with him?
Well, I had a job in Japan because of him. I worked for FMW, and Sabu was there too. And when he wrestled in a single match, Sabu and I would go to the ring with him to make sure. The Japanese weren't violent, but they have a thing over there. If you touch something that you're really scared of, you get good luck, and everybody would try to touch him. And he would chase them out of the arena, and 5 minutes later, he'd come back in the arena from outside, and the people would come too, and every chair was set up. I mean, he was a big draw. In fact, what made Japan hot again was a famous match with Abdullah and the Sheik against the Funks. That turned the Funks babyface there, and they had a run. They're still wrestling there. And
That was where Terry got his arm cut up.
yeah, with the fork from Abdullah.
And what happened with, I don't know if you were booking in WCW at this time, but the Sheik did manage Sabu at the
Yes.
Halloween Havoc. Why did that not work out, that situation?
Well, there was a spot they did. Jerry Lynn and Sabu did a spot, and they didn't tell the Sheik. And they both came over the top and landed on him and broke his leg and his hip. So that's what happened to him.
Do you think that Sabu could have had a good run at that time? Because that was probably when he was at his hottest.
Yes. I was with Sabu when I worked for the Sheik in Ontario, when he was running it with the Bearman. And Sabu, I either had one of his early matches, Market Lewin and I were there, and he had it from the beginning. And I always think he's one of the guys, and it's happened to hundreds of guys in our business that never really got the break they deserve. And Sabu put his body on the line every night. I mean, I saw him in FMW cut his arm so bad in barbed wire that you could, I mean, it was this long, his bicep was cut. He just taped it up and continued the match.
And what was the Sheik like in real life in your personal dealings with him?
I've heard a lot of people say that he wasn't a good payoff man. He was very good to me. I had a great guarantee when I worked for him, and he paid everything: room, food, transportation. He was great.
With the Sheik, what happened that his territory really died off in later years, went from being so hot to...
Well, if you go back and look at, in the 60s, the wrestlers that came off of national TV, meaning Chicago TV, Bruiser, Vern, Wilbur Snyder, Sheik, all wrestled on top too long. And the Sheik wrestled on top too long. He kept the belt way too long, and his matches started to be shorter and shorter. And then he did the same thing in Toronto. He went to Toronto, and he would want to get home to Detroit that night, and he'd make sure that he could catch the plane. The wrestlers themselves got caught into this program that they didn't, if they developed younger talent, they only brought them to a certain level to support their own asses, and didn't step away and give the younger kids a break. If the Sheik had stepped away, and if the Bruiser had stepped away, and if Vern had stepped away, like the time Hogan went there, and they didn't give him the strap, and they kept on doing the Dusty finish with Hogan and Bockwinkel. And Nick was a fabulous performer, but the people got tired of seeing the same guys over and over again, and then you start to think you're creative, and you're thinking of ways to keep the belt on the guy, and you start to cheat the fans out of a win. To me, it's like that finish wasn't really a Dusty finish. Dusty got it from Eddie, and Eddie used it sparingly, but it works. But when you do it over and over again, the people get disgusted. And I put it to, like, if you're watching the Super Bowl, like last year when they had the overtime game, if someone came right before the touchdown and stole the ball and went away, or if he scored that touchdown, they said, oh, we're going to replay it because he actually didn't score that touchdown. I think after a while the people get so sick of not finally getting what they deserve. I think there's a fine line when you're pushing a heel. You've got to make the people wait, but when it's their time to win, baby faces, you got to give it to them. You got to give the people what they have paid to see, and you can't give it to them too early because now, you know, it's, in my estimation, it's easier to make a heel than a baby face. It takes a baby face a little bit longer to get over, and when you do that, you've killed the baby face. Now, if you don't have another baby face really ready, you start to see it drop. The heel may still be the draw, but it starts to drop. And if you don't check your ego at the door, you say, oh, well, there was a rainstorm, or there was a rodeo in town. I heard Buddy Rogers once say, if they want to see it, they'll crawl over broken glass. And that's what I think happened to, that's why it was so easy for Vince, besides plucking talent. The guy, he went across the territories with a new stick. You know, they hadn't seen Jim Duggan in Minneapolis, but he was over in Louisiana, so Junkyard Dog, Ricky Martel, Hogan from Minneapolis, Blackjack from Florida, Tito from Amarillo, the Funks from Amarillo. He picked the best talent and brought them across the country. So they weren't getting burnt out in the same town. Like Detroit was running every week, Indianapolis was running every week. So it's much harder to keep the attention span. Even today, I don't know if you could do a weekly, I don't think you could do a weekly town because there's so much other entertainment. I mean, when I came to Florida, the only sports team was the Miami Dolphins. Now they have 3 football teams, 2 baseball teams, 2 basketball teams, and 2 hockey teams.
Yeah.
When the football season was over, and that was just in South Miami, people weren't going to leave Tampa and drive for a football game, but they would come to the wrestling matches. And Eddie was, a genius to be able to, Eddie stepped aside at a very young age. I think Eddie was 41. He'd work occasionally for a big show, but he gave it to Dusty, and he knew when it was time for Dusty to leave. He'd call Vince, he'd call Watts, he'd call whoever he needed to call, Crockett, and say, hey, Dusty needs to go away. And I've heard Jimmy Cornette say, we can't miss you unless you go. And that's why Dusty had that extended run in Florida. Eddie knew when to pull the trigger and send Dusty away.
And how did you yourself end up becoming involved in pro wrestling?
I had wrestled amateur, and I went to the Boston YMCA Union. I believe it's the second oldest athletic center in the world. And I used to wrestle amateur, and I saw some of the professional wrestlers there. And one day a guy came up to me and said, hey, you want to work out? And he was an amateur wrestler, and we worked out. And the next thing I know, he was from South Africa. His family was a big diamond owners. I think they were the second largest diamond company in South Africa, the Berries, and he always wanted to be a pro wrestler. And he said to me, "Hey, you ever think about being a pro wrestler?" And I said, "Yeah, but I don't know how to do it." He said, "Well, I got a friend in Montreal that runs a small promotion, and it's okay with the Montreal office because he was a huge star for them and a huge star in Europe. His name was Pat Gerard. He wrestled as Pat Curry, and I got a chance to go up there, and I got my first match."
And what was the experience in the first match?
Horrible. I had trained a little, so the day of the show, they had me, which never used to happen. I mean, now guys come to the building and they're training in the ring. Back then, nobody did. But they had me there like at 1 o'clock for a 7 o'clock show or 8 o'clock show. And they had me going through and said, just slow it down, we'll get it through. But I was waiting for them to give me a finish. And the friend of mine, Barry, wrestled earlier, and he came back, and for some reason they had me on after him. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I haven't gotten the finish yet." And he said, "Well, the referee will come and give it to you." Well, there was a wrestler that worked in Montreal. His name was Fernand Fichette, and he was over. And they put me in the ring with them. And I'm sure I potatoed him a couple of times, and I know I potatoed him one time with a kick. And he rolled out on the apron, was standing on the apron and holding the ropes. Well, you know the deal where you slingshot somebody in? Didn't click in my head. I hit the furthest rope and came off at like 30 miles an hour and knocked him 3 rows back. And he said, "F this," and walked back to the dressing room. When I was left, and I'm jumping on the top rope now, I'm scared that I've blown my chance. I'm yelling, "Come back, come back, come back." He goes back to the dressing room. I don't know what's going to happen. And he grabbed the referee and said, "You didn't tell the kid to finish." It was like a half-ass rib. And he was furious. And he said, "This kid could have hurt me, or I could have hurt the kid." And that was my rude awakening to the wrestling business.
So you had a bit of an easier way in than a lot of people, I guess, in those days.
Yeah, but I didn't in this way. When I went down south, I went to Georgia, and I didn't go to Georgia first. I went to South Carolina, and they had opposition with TV. It was Dutch Mantel's brother. And one of the guys from the Atlanta office came by and said, "Hey, we want you to come work for us." I went to work for Buddy Fuller for a while in Atlanta, but I was wrestling guys for 15 and 20 minutes, and they were old-timers. And they didn't give me anything except a deep breath, you know what I mean? They would rough you up and rub your face on the mat and that kind of thing. And one time and I would just sit there and not say anything. One time, for some reason, there was a guy named Dr. Timothy Guhagen who had been a pretty well-known star nationally, and he had retired. He owned a gym, so he'd wrestle some on the weekends. And I said, he used a sleeper for the finish, and I said, "Hey, does that sleeper really work?" So with about 6 seconds left to go in a match, we were going through. He put me to sleep, and really put me to sleep. So it was hard because the business was a lot closed. I did luck out to meet the guy because he had wrestled. Now, other guys might not have the easy time as I did getting in, but once you got in, they were trying to run you out to see if you were going to stick.
Do you think one of the problems today is that it's so easy to get in if you want to be a wrestler, because there's really a lot of guys in it that wouldn't have made it in the past because they're not really tough or not great athletes, and also there's other guys that are just being signed to WWE, for instance, just based on athletic credentials, who may have not have had the heart or the desire to do it in the past as well.
Well, that's a great question, because I think the talent today, like in most sports, are more athletic, but you really got to want this business, I think. And you have to be, in my estimation, have been a wrestling fan. It's something you have to be passionate about. And if you're not passionate about it, I think it translates to your performance. I mean, I've seen guys that really didn't know anything about the business getting big pushes, and they really sometimes faltered because they didn't have the desire. Then I've seen other guys that maybe physically shouldn't have made it, that made it because they had the desire to succeed in the business. But the other thing that's missing in the business, when I was a kid, it was 3 or 4 guys to a car, and all we did was talk about wrestling. And the younger you are, the more stories veterans would tell you. They would more things they would tell you. Well, I saw that move you did. The drop kick shouldn't have been thrown in that position. The guy had nowhere to take a bump. You know, when you went over the top rope, it looked horrible. So we had a time to talk, and it was almost like analyzing in football as they watch game films. You know, we didn't have that back then, but we had guys watching the matches to tell you what you did wrong. And I was lucky enough to be around some very smart people. And I think you're right. You can have a flood of people coming in. And I think we're seeing this for the last 6 or 7 years when they do WrestleMania. They have to bring back The Rock, or they have to bring, you know, and
It's not the guys wrestling on the house
No,
shows. They're
no.
headlining WrestleMania.
yeah,
Yeah, that's unfortunate, and it's going to be more of a problem as they continue to lose the few top draws they have left.
absolutely. And then the other guys, like, I don't think we'll ever see The Rock wrestle. He may appear again like he did with Ronda Rousey a couple of WrestleManias ago, but you're not going to see him wrestle. You're never going to see Austin wrestle. Flair, you're never going to see wrestle. So the younger guys that have gotten their spot maybe needed a little bit more season. I equate everything to baseball. There's low A ball, there's high A ball, there's double A ball, there's triple A, and sometimes a guy comes up to the majors and he can't hit a curve, so they send him back down and make sure he develops that. And I think maybe this NXT, what they're developing, if they bring a guy on the main roster, he doesn't click, rather than sending him out. And if he has the ability, but it hasn't quite got it yet, you send him back down there and help him develop. But everybody's trained the same, so the matches start to look alike. When I broke in the business, there was 37 individual companies. And when you watched the matches back then, I could tell, not knowing where a guy came in from, whether he came in from Georgia. In Georgia, they worked a slower style, a lot more holds, not many high spots. In California and San Francisco, there was a lot of high spots, not much blood. In Florida, it was all wrestling underneath, but violence on top. LA was a little bit more showboat. Portland was off to itself, and it was basically just wrestling. In fact, Don Owens had a brother, Elton, and on his first match, he would pay the guys to shoot for 5 minutes. So it was a completely, and then in Canada, in Montreal, there was 2 promotions that were doing great at the time, the Rougeaus and the Vachons, 2 separate promotions. And then in the Maritimes, you had 2 separate promotions. And in the Montreal, it was a mixture of wrestling and violence. And in the Maritimes, it was more high spots, because the guys in the Maritime, most of those guys, when the territory closed for the winter, went down to the Carolinas or Florida to get away from the winter. So they would adapt and Carolinas were similar to Florida, but not as much violence. And then back then, Gulas had 3 different territories within his territory. A lot of violence in Nashville, a lot of violence in Knoxville, but they used to use a lot of wrestling. And then in the Memphis end, you know, it was a little bit more character driven.
Now, I guess the first titles you won were the NWA Gulf Coast Tag Team Championships.
Yeah.
Was that a big deal to you? And
yes, because Ricky Morton will tell you he learned from Ken Lucas. I was lucky enough to be Ken Lucas's partner. Jack Briscoe told me that of all the guys he ever wrestled, Ken was one of the top 5. Nobody knows much about Ken Lucas, but he was a huge star. He was the Dusty Rhodes of the Gulf Coast area. Taught Punky how to sell, and he made a fabulous comeback. And Punky tells me that Ken Lucas is the greatest babyface of all times, and he's pretty close if he wasn't in that era.
And what did you take away from your experience wrestling in the Gulf Coast Championship Wrestling?
Well, I took away that the babyface really needs to be down, and there has to be a hot comeback to get the people, and you have to tell a story. And there was a lot more storytelling in, I don't know, today the definition of heel and babyface is somewhat blurred, quite a bit blurred. So it's a whole different thing. But back then, here's the crazy thing. Back then, when a guy came out of the dressing room, they knew he was a heel from the dressing room where he came out of. If he was a babyface, they knew to cheer him. It was like almost Pavlov's dog, where you rang the bell and the dog salivas. Well, they booed you even if it was your first night in the territory because you came out of the heel side and they cheered you if you were a babyface. And I learned a lot from Ken Lucas just by watching. Besides us being tag team, he would wrestle Bobby Shane and Briscoe when he came in and different guys. And I saw how he would maneuver the match, that he would dominate the match at the beginning by wrestling, and then slowly the heel would have to cheat. It wasn't they started the match punch and kick, because they had no issue and were supposed to be wrestlers. And then as the match progressed, the heel would cheat more and Ken would get a little hot but wouldn't throw a punch. And finally the heel would do something, maybe give him a bump outside, and as Ken's coming in, step beside the referee, the heel, and kick Ken in the head as he's coming in and stomp him and take over, slam him, and Ken would go into the Punky Morton soul jump. And then when he came back, he'd have the people standing, and their timing was impeccable, because when they went for the finish, that was as high as they were going to get them. And they knew if they didn't do the finish then, they'd have to start the match almost all over again to get the people back. Because once you lose them from that high, it's very hard to get them back. But I learned that from Ken Lucas, and Punky certainly learned it from Ken Lucas.
And how did you first end up in Florida Championship Wrestling?
That's a funny story. I was Robert Fuller's tag team partner, and I had been there 13 months, and I was tired of the trips, and I was thought about going to Portland. They asked me to come. I sent some pictures, and then Robert came to me and said, "I'm going to Australia," and Jim Barnett said, "I can take you to Australia if you want." I said, "Wow, that sounds nice." Right before I was going to go to Australia, Buddy bought into the Florida office, and Robert and I went down there to be a tag team. And then when I got down there, things changed. Mike had broken into the business like a year before. It was just about the same time I did. And because Mike and I were similar looking, Robert's brother Ronald came in, so they kind of put them as a team, a brother team, and put me and Mike together. You know, we had similar athletic backgrounds, so it worked out for me, and you know, the rest is kind of history for me.
Is it true that Eddie Graham would fly his plane drunk from time to time?
Yeah, yeah. Eddie was at one time, and then Eddie was sober for 13 years. But I mean, the Funks told the story about when he flew underneath the Skyway Bridge, and he was drunk. So, I mean, Eddie was a daredevil. Eddie only went to like the 5th grade, but he was a pilot. He was a captain of a boat, and he was a brilliant man in the wrestling industry. But like the rest of us, he had some demons. And he got cured of the demons, or stopped anyway, for 13 years. And me, Kern, and Mike were on a boat one day with Eddie, and we were fishing, and we were shotgunning beers, the 3 of us, and he said, "Let me try one." And he shotgunned the beer. Now, I don't know if he had been drinking before that, but that was the first time I ever saw him take a drink. And then, you know, progressively, it kind of took back over on him.
And why did he die, do you think? What was there's so many stories that circulate.
So many stories, and I think there's a little bit of truth to all of them. He got caught up with the wrong people. Sometimes smart people can think they're the smartest and no one can con them. Well, he got caught up with a con guy that got into the political scene, that had somebody in the planning department that told him, buy this property because I-4 is going to be extended. If it wasn't I-4, it was 495, can't remember. And when that happened, Eddie had dumped a lot of money into it. And then all of a sudden, there was rumors that the guy that gave him the information got thrown out of his job because he was giving inside information. And Eddie thought he might be going to jail. And, you know, Eddie was thought of in the state of Florida as, you know, Mr. Florida. And the other thing was financial problems, women problems, and
There's a lot going on.
yeah, and he might have had health issues because Eddie's physique changed now. Could have been from the drinking, but it's a sad thing. It ran in the family. A lot of people don't know this. Eddie's father committed suicide. Eddie committed suicide. Mike's son committed suicide. I just found out Eddie's brother committed suicide, but he had terminal cancer. And then Mike, so, you know, there may be a suicidal gene or depression. They found out there's a depression gene, so.
It didn't get a huge amount of mainstream publicity when Mike killed himself.
Right.
Did you have any insight into what was going on with Mike since you were close with him?
It was a funny thing that happened. Mike and I had been very close at times. When I was tag team with Mike and we had to lose, I would be the one that took the fall. And Mike didn't like that all the time, but he was going to be there. It was going to be his company someday. So when I left Florida and went to different territories, like Atlanta and Knoxville and San Francisco, Mike would come out and do jobs for me. So we were close, and we rode together, partied together, we fished together, dove together, and he had a radio show, and I was his last guest. And after the show, we hung up. Mike was not an outgoing guy with his affection. And after that radio show, he called me up and said, you know, I love you. And I said, what? He said, you know, I love you. He said, and I said, you know, I love you too, Mike. He said, no, I love you. And he hung up. And I'm going to say it was like 6 days later, he committed suicide. And it shocked me. And I should have not been shocked because he said something that, and General Briscoe and I were talking today at the Fan Fest. After Mike's son died, he said to Briscoe and me and his friends, I must have been a horrible son and a horrible father. And Mike went downhill after the son died. I mean, he wasted away to nothing. At one time, Mike had the longest powerlifting record in the state of Florida, 195 pounds. And I know for a fact Mike was clean back then. I mean, no steroids. And he bench pressed 440, which was unheard of for a 195 pounder for a state champion. And that lasted about 18 years. But when I saw him the last time, he was probably maybe 160 pounds, maybe.
Why do you think the key was to your success in Florida? Why you were so over in Florida?
I think it was luck too, and I had the best baby faces in the world to work with. The angle we did was a story that they grasped every week, and we didn't rush it. When I came back, the babyface dressing room was split. Blackjack and Barry and Kendall and some other babyface were saying, he's not the same guy that left here. He's a rule breaker and he's crazy and all this. And Mike and some of the other babyfaces stood up for me and said, hey, Blackjack, your record isn't spotless either. You shouldn't be throwing stones. But we were lucky enough to get Steve Kern to cut an interview from Vern's territory. Vern sent it to us, and everybody knew that the three of us were very close. And Steve said, Mike, this is directed at you. I know he used to be your friend, and you still think he is. He isn't your friend. He's only out for himself. So we had a Florida tournament on TV, and it ended up me and Barry. And that time you had 47 minutes of commercial-free TV. The rest, 13 minutes, was filled up with commercials, but we had to wrestle through the commercials. And we went 46 minutes. We left a minute left in the match, and the finish was that I went to leg dive Barry. It was a straight out babyface match, and we were moving, and I could move quite better than I ever did. And Barry was one of the greatest babyfaces of all times. And Barry took a bump to the floor, and as he was getting in, and Mike was commentating with Gordon. And Mike put me over saying, see, he could have kicked him or he could have done that. And I sat in the ropes. Barry said, excuse me. I went out first, and Barry sat on the ropes and pushed them up. And I came in the ring. A few minutes later, we did a spot where Barry tackled me. I dropped flat, but I was close to the ropes, and he looked like he tripped over me. He did trip over me, but you know, Barry was such a great athlete. And he went over the top rope and landed on the floor. Well, I did the same thing. I held the rope open, and when Barry stepped in and had his head down, I kicked him a field goal him right in the face. And when he did, I covered him 1, 2, 3, and I grabbed the belt, and I went running to the desk to make an interview, and Mike stood up and said, they were right about you. And I said, yeah, they sure were. And I took the belt. And I met a guy today that has this on tape. I took the belt and I said, I gotta make this look good. And I leveled Mike with the belt. I mean, I gave it to him. And when I knocked him off the stool, he was so pissed at me, he started running around to get me, legitimately. But do you remember when we had the buttons in the front of the jeans? I knocked the buttons off, and he's chased me, and his pants are falling down. And there's Mike in his little skivvies holding his pants, chasing me. Got back to the dressing room, he was bullshit, you know. And I said, okay, that's how it is, you know. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to potato you. But then, the following week, I made an interview and I said there was no American dream. Everybody's living to paycheck to paycheck. We had gas shortages. The country is in chaos. We just have come off a war. Where we didn't win for the first time, and unbeknownst to me, after I got to that interview about There's No American Dream, Dusty came out and got a real scathing interview on me. So MTV had first started then, and I was watching Billy Idol, Michael Jackson and Thriller, Ozzy Osbourne, Alex Cooper. I saw how there was this cult-like thing going on. Then I started watching horror movies like, Friday the 13th, Halloween, a bunch of them. And I started writing stuff down, and I had just come off spending a lot of time in Asia with Mark, in Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong. So I kind of grabbed that culture too, because it's so diverse from our culture. I started throwing things in there but I didn't start throwing that in till later on, because I started at 8 and I was just being an idiot, the people thought, and being a heel. But then I started lightly putting mascara underneath my eyes so it looked like I had been sleeping. Well, at the time, in the 80s, Florida was full of people staying up at night. And I would be doing my interviews and saying, I'm going to get you, Dusty, or whoever. And then in the interview, I'd turn and say, yeah, I see you in the LTD. You're not going to catch me. And then I'd go back to my interview. But I had Dusty Rhodes, Blackjack Mulligan, Superstar Billy Graham, Andre the Giant, Mike, Barry. I had the greatest baby faces in the world, and they were kind enough to say, okay, let's see if this can get over. And they were the ones that got it over. Plus, I saw Gordon's son today, and I said, your father got me over as much as the baby faces, because Gordon was a guy that treated wrestling like a sport, and he would say, there's no need for this, there's something wrong with him, something's changed. And he just kept on playing on that, there's something that's changed in him. And we started the thing, and then it went from one step to another. And then I had Jake Roberts, young Jake Roberts is my partner. We did the famous angle, Lose or Leave Town, Dusty, and me in the cage in St. Pete, and Santa Claus, who is Jake, gives me the atomizer, and I put Dusty out and beat him 1, 2, 3. And at first, it was like no noise. Well, when they opened up the cage and I got through, the garbage started coming down. It was like the famous thing where Hogan turned.
Yeah.
It was that kind of heat. It was white heat. They started throwing stuff at me. Funny story, it's the funniest thing I've ever seen. Jake and I heading back to the dressing room, and St. Pete had balconies. And the first balcony was about 12 feet in the air. And I'll never forget, this guy yelled at Jake, F Santa. And he jumped onto the balcony at Jake. And Jake just stepped out of the way, and he landed on the floor and broke his leg. I mean, it's crazy, right? It was that kind of heat, because they were sure Dusty was going to beat me like he beat everybody else, and off he'd go, and then the Midnight Rider appeared, and we did things like that. But, I mean, I saw some crazy stuff there in Florida. I had a group of fans in Orlando. The only fans I had in Florida. A group of young guys in Orlando. In Orlando we wrestled at A. Graham Sports Stadium. And this wasn't Orlando as we know it today. This was on the edge of the town, really pickup trucks, gun racks.
It's still like that on the edge of Orlando, actually.
Okay.
I made a wrong turn the other day.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So these guys
It's like Deliverance.
Exactly. So these guys started cheering for me. It lasted 2 weeks. Because Mark and I used to, if we were on last, we would wait till the parking lot was cleared because we didn't want people to see us. Because we traveled everywhere in our robes also, we lived our gimmick. And we coming out and we see the kids and they're laying on the ground and their van is on fire. And I said to Mark, we better get out of here because the police are going to be here and wonder why this happened. So, I mean, it was because of Dusty and Blackjack. It was basically, it was good versus evil. I mean, the oldest story in the world. And then I was lucky enough to have Mark. Mark was an incredible worker, an incredible babyface. Vince Sr. said he was the greatest babyface he ever had. And when Mark turned heel, it isn't the same effect, but when he turned heel in Texas, after being such a huge babyface and snapping from, and I stole a little from this from Mark. Mark was that white meat babyface like Punky and doing good things in the community. And then when he snapped and became the maniac and started whacking his head, you know, and Mark was like you, he was impressive. He was 300 pounds. And then I conjured him up from the sea. Well, I didn't start my character conjured him up from the sea. That was, I started at A, and by the time I conjured Mark up from the sea, we were at S. So they've been watching this television program and they got sucked into it and sucked into it. So if I had done that conjuring Mark up originally, I don't think it would have got over because it was so far removed from wrestling. But we did it step by step by step. And a lot of that was Eddie's influence, not my character, but how to build it. A lot of it was Dusty's. And like a guy that doesn't ever get credit about it being a genius is Blackjack Mulligan. I mean, the first time I got to be a heel after I did that promo I talked to you about Dusty, I was booked against Mulligan in Orlando. And we had separate dressing rooms back in Orlando, but you couldn't see it. There was a wall. And Dusty called me over because I was wrestling Jack in the Sun in Maine. And he said, Jack, I think we need to do a DQ tonight, and we'll start the angle this way. And Jack said, if we're going to do this, he's going to beat me, and you're going to try to make the save, and he's going to leave you laying, and he's going to leave Barry laying. And, you know, you're a great friend of Superstar Billy Graham. So when we got to Superstar, he did some of the greatest interviews of all times when it was still pictures him laying in the desert purging himself from me. So I had this group of baby faces that Dusty had been the NWA champ. Barry was going to be the NWA champ until he had a falling out with Dusty. Superstar is Superstar. He was the WWF champion. Biggest mistake that company ever made was not turning him babyface. And Mulligan had been the U.S. heavyweight champion. So it was almost set up perfectly for me. I couldn't have chosen the baby faces any better. And I had Mike too, so and Mike was very cognizant of the fact that he was never going to be champion. He knew his role, and he would give me a different type of match. I'd have to wrestle a little bit more, but he would give me 75% of the match, and he said he could sell. He could sell. Ric Flair says about him too. Ric Flair says some of the best matches he's ever had in his life are up there with Steamboat's with Mike. Mike was an underrated guy because he wasn't big.
Right. And I already know the answer to this question, but you mentioned Jake the Snake was in Florida.
Yeah.
Jake has said that getting hit on the head with the guitar by the Honky Tonk Man caused all of his drug issues. But did you notice back in the Florida days if Jake had already begun his partying ways or not?
I think at that time in Florida, everybody was starting to dabble. I mean, it was all over the place. I mean, the town was hot. I mean, we had a lot of strange people coming to the matches with gifts. So I don't think the guitar set Jake off, no.
And what was the party scene like? Was it as bad as like Scarface and some of these movies portray in
Well,
Florida?
without giving the guy's name, and the guys in the business gonna know who I'm talking about. They got fired 37 cops one time, okay? And we had a big show, and the Junkyard Dog had come in, Jake was there, I was there, and this was, Dusty was out of town, and when Dusty was out of town, I would give the finishes, and so the cops came to me and said, we see all these wrestlers. It was in the Miami Beach Convention Center, and back where our dressing room was, down the hall was this long bathroom where it had a metal ledge over the sinks, you know, those old men. And the cop says, we're seeing a bunch of wrestlers going down that bathroom with that guy. I said, I don't know anything about it. They said, let's take a walk. And as we're taking the walk, they said, you're trying to tell us you don't know what's going on here? I said, no, I have no idea. He said, well, do you want us to start going through bags? I said, uh-oh. I said, I don't think that's legal. I mean, how are you going to do that? So they said, let's go in the room. We go in the bathroom, and there's a line out like this on the thing. And the cop says, who do you think that is? I said, I got no idea. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Oh, we're going to go search bags. Who do you think it is? And I'm saying to myself, so hopefully no one has anything in the bag, and if they do, I don't think they can search it. I'll play hard ass. I said, I have no idea. Cop reached in, opened up his shirt, pulled out a straw and went, good rib, huh? I said, yeah, you got me. I mean, and then it was 37 fight because one of the guys' girlfriends posed for Penthouse, and in the article says the best time I ever had in my life was on Miami Beach in my boyfriend's patrol car with the lights and sirens going, high on coke, screwing in the back seat. So yeah, it was like Scarface back then. Miami was built on drug money.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you've seen the documentaries, Cocaine Cowboy. That's how it was. I mean, it was. I mean, remember that Time magazine came out and said it was actually good for you.
Right.
I mean, doctors, lawyers, judges, everybody was doing it. It was like, back in my head, I was saying, you know, anything that makes you this euphoric can't be good for you. And some guys got into it, and not everybody got into it. But I think most of the guys had dabbled a little.
Yeah, because it was a common thing.
It was,
right?
yeah, it was not common like it became later on. Because first of all, at that time, the price was ridiculous, you know. And you weren't going to go out and spend, if you're making $700, you're not going to go out and spend with, that's before expenses, you're not going to go out and spend $250 for a thing that's going to last you and somebody else, you know, a night. I don't think so anyway.
And you mentioned superstar Billy Graham.
Yeah.
We'll just bring him up, even though we discussed it last night off camera. You brought up that you believe he should have remained WWE champion and turned babyface. Could you just elaborate on that?
Yeah. I mean, people say to me, you know, who's the greatest champion? I can tell you this. I'll tell you this about all the champions I saw, whether I was a fan or in the business, the one that impressed me when he walked out of the dressing room was Bruno Sammartino. If I had landed here in this country and didn't know anything about wrestling, they said pick out the world heavyweight champion was Bruno. But for charisma, nobody had talked like Billy. I mean, Dusty stole it from Billy. You know, they were very close. They talked all the time. Bob Dylan, you know, he referenced Bob Dylan a lot. But superstar, there's that pose of superstar in the red long tights with his arm his arm looks like it's 42 inches. You know what
Yeah.
I'm talking about? And then that other one where he has the belt and he's ripped. He had won a Mr. America contest.
Yeah, he won Best Arms.
Yeah, and his interviews. And then what happened was the people were turning him. And for some reason, I'll tell you two reasons I think. For some reason, Vince didn't think that turning him babyface would work. Yet he had turned babyfaces heels and had a lot, drew up money. You know, Zabisco and Bruno. Superstar, to me, nobody could ever rap like he did in that era. Nobody looked like him until Scott Steiner. And the people loved him. The reason why I think he didn't go with them was Vince wanted to get away from, Jack Briscoe had drawn a lot of money. He wanted to get away from the ethnic champion. Pedro and Bruno had the belt a long time between the both of them. And he saw what Briscoe could do, and he put Bob Backlund in that position. And he surrounded Bob with, bull rope matches with Dusty Superstar, Jimmy Snuka, Don Morocco. I think Billy Graham could have been, at that time, bigger than Hogan was. Nobody was going nationwide yet. But Billy could have been, they did it in Miami. He came down and wrestled Holly Race for an hour. A lot of people don't understand that Billy could work too. He got away with a lot of his pose and a lot of other things. But that was the time. I think...
He liked being a babyface too, on top of that.
Yeah, and I think of all the mistakes I've ever seen, money-wise, that flew away, that was it.
Because he holds the record for most consecutive sellouts in Madison Square Garden, 19 out of 20. And the only one didn't sell out was against Peter Maivia, and that was only a little bit shy of selling out. So
Yeah.
it would have definitely continued on. And working with him in Florida, any specific memories or stories from that?
Yeah, when we turned him babyface. I mean, the famous thing where I go to slap the valet, the lock, and he grabs my hand. Well, when I threw that chair at him, and he didn't even have to cut. I threw that chair at him and we hung him up. Fonzie, who's the referee, we all know Fonzie, came and jumped on my back. He was so pissed. And he had started, he had the bald head then, but he started to morph into the old Superstar. And if you look back at those pictures when he's in the desert, you can see it's Superstar, except he doesn't have the blonde hair anymore. I think that Hulk Hogan stole 80% of his shtick from Superstar Billy Graham.
Yeah, because
The
Billy
pythons.
actually did the cupping of the ear too, and the shirt rip.
Yeah.
He just didn't do it every match.
Yeah,
But,
and
the brother.
Billy was a preacher, and he got into that. The brother, I think.
And he coined the term superstars, wrestlers, and now everyone's called superstars.
I never thought of that. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I always thought Billy was way ahead of his time, but there should have been a match. Just think of the poster, him versus Hogan, face to face. They wouldn't have.
But Hogan wouldn't have wanted it.
No, and I don't think he would wanted Billy around either.
No.
Because Billy looked like a bodybuilder. Hulk was muscular, but he was no bodybuilder. And Billy, I mean, he was an amazing, amazing specimen.
And Billy actually helped Hogan get started as well.
Yeah.
Helped him get booked, and he was one of the first wrestlers to talk to him. Because you probably know about this, so I may as well ask you about this now. I guess you were probably around when Hogan was hanging out at the
Rocket
matches.
Lounge?
Yeah.
He used to play at the Rocket Lounge, guitar, and he came to the matches. And I think him and Billy struck up a friendship because where Billy lived in Tampa, he lived in those apartments that was close to a very famous Smith's gym. Harry Smith was Junior Mr. America in 1948, and Harry still is, he's 92 and he still looks like an athlete. And Hogan was hanging around Billy, and they became friends, and you know, I'm sure Billy was the one that said, bleach your hair blonde, and the rest is history.
And do you think it's sad that Billy isn't used by WWE, for instance, at NXT, helping people with promos when he has such a great mind for the business and he's very creative as he worked with them, but there's so much he could give, but unfortunately...
To me, the greatest interviewers I ever saw was King Curtis, and this is no direct number, King Curtis, Blackjack Mulligan, Dusty Rhodes, Superstar Billy Graham. Superstar could talk people into the building, and today they have, let me ask you this, you think Superstars, if they gave him a scripted interview, would be the same?
No.
That's what I think is lacking. I don't know if they want the guys to be so politically correct, they're afraid they'll go off in a tangent or something, but Superstar enthralled me. I'll give you an example. I have family that had no interest in wrestling, but when he came, they had never seen a specimen like him, and they didn't even go to the matches, but they tuned in to see him talk. And I don't care how you get the asses in seats. That to me is good worker. Guys can be the greatest workers technically, but if you don't put asses in seats, and you said he sold out 19 out of 20, that doesn't happen overnight, you know what I mean? And I'm sure that half the matches that he sold out, he was a stone heel. Then you started to see, by the time he got to Peter, he was the baby face, you know, and he was just, I could see how a guy could go in depression with this, that he's so talented that they don't use him. I don't know why. I mean, we're sitting here today, and I mean, people say, well, we don't hear the interviews anymore. You know, The Rock made a great interview. Austin made a great interview. I don't see those same interviews. I mean, I think Cena's done a wonderful job being the face of the franchise. It looks like Roman Reigns is going to be the next one. But they don't have that interview that Billy once had.
I think the other problem with the interviews and characters in general, though, is that the wrestlers themselves these days are more politically correct people, whereas in your prime, like, Piper's pretty much legitimately crazy.
Yeah.
Flair, I'm sure there's parts of your gimmick that's similar to you.
Yes.
Billy
yes.
Graham is very similar in personality to his character.
Yeah.
But a lot of these guys are just playing video games when they're not wrestling, and I'm not saying anything's wrong with going to university, but most of them have been to university, well educated, whereas
Right.
in the older days they were more guys that couldn't get jobs anywhere else, as I think Terry Funk has said.
And coming from Terry, you know, Terry's still around and he's still wrestling. In fact, he's wrestling PCW in January, and the characters, Terry's character is Terry Funk. It doesn't vary that much. Dusty Rhodes' character was Dusty Rhodes. In Superstar, in Blackjack, and guys like, and Piper, like you said, he legitimately. One time he came to Florida for a while when he was freelancing, and they teamed him and I together, and we're driving down the road. It was the first time he ever saw an alligator. You know, I hope Peter doesn't get on me telling this story, but I think the statutes of limitations have ran out. He said, stop the car, stop the car. We were on Alligator Alley, where all the gators, you know, cover from Tampa to Miami. I didn't know what he was going to do, take a picture, because as I stopped the car, he said, open the trunk, open the trunk. He opens the trunk and takes out a .45 Magnum and starts shooting at them. I thought, whoa, you know, so what you're saying is Piper was on the edge.
And you mentioned Terry Funk. Do you have any Terry Funk stories that you could share?
Yeah, Terry, this is a funny one. Terry Funk and Dickie Murdoch used to come from El Paso back to Amarillo. And they would buy, well, this is, you couldn't get away with this today, and I don't believe you should. But back in the days, the boys bought beer, and they would drink beer while they were driving and going home. There was this one light town before you got to Amarillo, about 40 miles. I can't remember the name. But Terry used to go through that town like at 2:30 in the morning, going about 95 miles an hour in a 45-mile-an-hour zone. And this cop used to chase him, and that was back. If you got over the county line, they couldn't chase you anymore. So this happened week after week after week. So about 5 weeks into this thing, same thing happens, but you got to come up over a hill before you get to Amarillo. And when Terry took the hill, the cop went over the line. And he says, well, I'm going to take it to the house. He can't catch me. When he came over the top of the ridge, there was cop cars blocking it. And they knew it was Terry. And when he jammed on the brakes and put it in park, he opened the door, beer cans were falling off, the cop was livid. I got you now, I got you now, I got you now. And Terry looked at him and said, hey, why don't we just shake hands and forget about the whole thing? That's Terry Funk, he's a wild man, And when you're wrestling, when you're wrestling Terry, you're wrestling Terry. You better have your boots tight and take a lunch. He's Terry Funk.
You also spent time in the WWF.
Yeah.
Did you think that is the number one professional wrestling promotion at the time, even though it wasn't national? Was that still considered like the top promotion to work for?
Yeah, because they had all the major towns, and like they had Boston, Providence, Hartford, Bridgeport, New York, Brooklyn, even though, it wasn't the Barclays Center. They had Philly, they had Baltimore, they had Landover, they had Pittsburgh, they had, they had the biggest towns in the United States. So you knew you were going to make a good living if you went there. That's why so many guys stayed there and took a drop on the card, because they were making a good living and didn't want to go on the road and make similar money if they were lucky, or make a little bit more, or you stay home and take it as a job. And I think a lot of guys did.
And what were your thoughts on working with Vince Sr.?
He was brilliant. He actually helped me learn how to book. I was around Eddie, and Eddie was Vince's booker. People don't know this. Vince didn't have a booker, but he listened to Eddie on everything. And we used to do TV in Philly at the arena that they shot Rocky in when he comes in, where the training center was. And Vince had a table, and all of his cronies sat by him. Monsoon, Skolin, Arnold Savoli, Angelo Savoli, Phil Zacco, the Grand Wizard, Lou Albano, Tony Altamore, they were all there. So one day, I got there early, and nobody was in the room, and his book was on the desk. And I said, should I do it? And I said, I got to see how he does this. Well, I went and opened his book, and it was the year had just started. And I looked at what he had for coming up Madison Square Garden. And I flipped to the end of the year. He had it booked all the way out. Now, he didn't have the underneath card booked, but he had the main event booked. He had the tag match booked. and he had a special match book, special attraction. And I noticed some guys got 3 matches, some guys got 2, some guys only got 1, and some of the guys that got 1 were as good as the guys getting 3. And he came in and saw me looking at his book. He says, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yeah, you just did." He said, "You're interested in this?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, sit down." I said, and I asked him a question. I said, "How do you decide who gets 3, 2, 1 a year ahead of time?" He said, "I tried never to fall into a pattern." And that really hit me, because we talked about the other wrestlers falling into the pattern and their territories died. When Vince Jr. got it, he's done a magnificent job as making it worldwide. But his father left that territory in great shape. He could have ran that as a territory, and if he followed that pattern, I think he would have done as well, and probably expanded, because other territories would have dried up. But to be able to see the future that far out and keep to your game plan. There was a couple of times, like, I'm not sure, when I looked in the book, I was trying to remember this. I'm not sure if Hansen was originally going to get 3 or 2. I knew he was getting 2, but when he broke Bruno's neck, that was the second match they had. So I don't know, and that drew the big house in Shea Stadium. So to be able to have enough confidence in yourself to book something a year ahead of time, and of course something would happen. We'll say in a special attraction, maybe the guy you get booked, you got Andre against hypothetically Bundy, but Bundy gets hurt, so you got to change that a little. But he, on paper, he had it done. He just had to fill in the underneath, and then bring in a guy that he was going to bring in maybe 6 months from now, give him a shot at the Garden so that people could see him, so he could see the reaction. He was very, very ahead of his time. But again, Eddie and him talked quite frequently. He lived in Fort Lauderdale part of the year. So, yeah.
So when you're saying that he didn't have an official booker, I guess, would it just be him deciding the finishes of the TV tapings, or would the agents be?
No, he only time I believe that he would go for a finish, maybe once in a while he'd call Eddie and they'd kick around the finish, but he'd have his gaggle of guys, and they would say, okay, like Bruno losing to Billy, how are we going to do it, and it's going to be Baltimore, let's not do it in New York, they're smart like that, not do it in New York, we don't have a riot, and let's put his feet up on the ropes, and we'll do something that we can come back with. He cheated Bruno out of it, so yeah, he I don't think he came up with all the finishes, but he would give them a direction and they would come up with it.
And last night you were mentioning that Steve Kern was originally going to be possibly going to have Backlund's spot.
Yeah.
I guess it was Eddie Graham that told you that?
I was there in the office when the phone call happened. I used to fish with Eddie. Michael and him fell out for a while, and I used to fish with Eddie. And it got to be a little bit uncomfortable. I've told the story before, because sometimes he would fly me to the town, and Mike wanted to drive, and so we were going to go fishing. It was a Tuesday, because I was in Tampa, and we were going to go deep sea fishing on this. He had a big fishing boat, a striker, the magnificent boats. And he was on the phone to Vince, and he waved me in. And this is when Vince wanted an All-American boy. He said, hey, I saw the tag team, and Kern and Backlund were tag team partners. And he said, I like that Backlund. And Eddie said, well, Kern's been working longer, and his father was a prisoner of war, And it can't be much more all-American than that, and if you ever wanted to pull something out of the hat, you could have that in the background. And he said, no, I'm going to go with Backlund. And then he said, I think Kern would get over better. And he said, no, I'm going to go with Backlund. And Eddie said, well, I'll bet you $100 you're going to decide someday to go with Kern instead of Backlund. And I don't even know if Steve knows this story. And he said, no, I'm going to make Backlund draw. And he did, because he had Superstar and Dusty underneath. I mean, he built the card around it. Bobby did a hell of a transition. But to this day, I still think Superstar should have turned babyface. And the one he should have turned against, they had done it so many times in tag teams, the babyface turned against the other babyface. Koloff in Superstar would have drawn a ton of money. One of former WWE.
Yeah, that was Billy's idea. He wanted Koloff to turn on him. That was how he wanted to switch.
It was. I mean, I didn't know that, but that was made. I mean, you could see that. You have a Russian, and then you have Superstar talking, and Ivan doing the with the manager talking. You know, and I kind of think he should have done it at the time. Wasn't Ernie was Billy's manager?
Yeah.
Ernie could, Grand Wizard could have got involved in that finish and been with Koloff.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, and he could have talked for Koloff.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate that that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And you also worked for Georgia Championship Wrestling. What was working for that company like at the time?
Well, it was nationwide. Bunhead had come back from Australia. And I was on the first time they went outside of Atlanta when we went and invaded another territory, but it wasn't an invasion. We were going to give, I'm not sure of the percentage, but they're giving the Sheik a percentage of towns he wasn't even running. And I mean, it was crazy how powerful that TV was, and Tommy Rich was on top. And if you look at Tommy, you'd say, oh, he couldn't draw that money, but it was like the Beatles came, you know what I mean? Girls were throwing their hotel room keys at him, and that showed me how powerful, and I knew it, but that really showed me how powerful TV was. And
Barnett, didn't you say that Tommy Rich, you never saw anyone over with the females as Tommy Rich?
Yeah, never. I mean, the young girls wanted to be with them. The older women wanted to mother them. It was crazy.
So was Ole Anderson booking at that time?
Yeah, he was. You know, and Ole gets a bad rap sometime because he's damn near impossible to get along with. And he would make mistakes and not admit it sometimes. And you had to stand your ground with Ole. I mean, not physically, but mentally, because, you know, you couldn't let him run roughshod over you, and he would try to do it. And I kind of think that's why Tommy Rich originally left and went to Tennessee, that Ole started to push Tommy. Not, when I say push Tommy, I don't mean push him on the guys. They kind of started getting under Tommy's skin. No matter what Tommy did, he could sell out the Omni. There was no compliment. And it's still an athletic event. So entertainment athletic, you want when you sell out a building, someone say, hey, you know, thanks for the house, great job. And it didn't come. And I think Tommy did that vindictively, and it backfired on him.
And Bill Watts came in here and there to book Atlanta. Was he ever around when you were there?
I had a very short time he came in, and he did a good job when he came in, but Bill, right away when he came back to WCW, I knew he wasn't going to make it because he had made enemies early when it was Georgia Championship Wrestling. When I say enemies, he made it in the CNN Center with people. You know, he was Bill Watts. He's gruff, he's aggressive, and he's sometimes, what's the word I'm looking for? Sometimes he's abrasive. So you can't do that in a business environment. So he was not meant to be in a corporate environment.
And how did you personally like dealing with him, if you ever dealt with him?
Yeah, I dealt with him in Florida.
Oh yeah, because he would come in with Eddie to help Eddie out too.
Yeah, and he was booking there in Florida, and I look back at it. He said he got his PhD from Eddie, but he worked. Look at the places he worked: Vince, Shires, Jim Barnett, and Eddie. You know, almost the same school of Dusty. So he came into Florida and he had a pretty good run, but that's when he could buy into the Oklahoma territory. So he was there probably 6 months. He was there with the big Dusty turn with Park Song and Gary Hart. So I gotta say he was successful in Florida, big time.
Is there any like weird thing that you ever noticed with Bill Watts in your dealings with him? Because apparently there's stories like he would urinate off of the CNN center.
I heard that story too. I mean, that's what I'm saying. He was Bill was a cowboy. He should have been in the plains of Oklahoma rather than in the CNN center. And Bill could bully people, but sometimes there were some guys he couldn't bully. There's a guy called Tony Charles. He's a guy that doesn't get his, he's one of the first Brits to come to the country. And I was lucky enough to be around Tony a long time. And he threw the best drop kick I've ever seen. And Tony was an amateur wrestler like yourself, but I never knew this until lately. I was talking to Agent Street. Tony won the British Games twice, I think. You know, that's a prestigious thing in Europe, the British Games.
Yeah, what is it, the Commonwealth?
Yeah, the Commonwealth and British.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so he won both. And Watts was giving Tony some crap about being late, and he said, I should smack you in the head, Tony. And Tony said, don't even think about it, Bill. And Bill's face went woo, you know. And Tony was maybe 80 pounds lighter than him, but he was a buzzsaw, you know, and you weren't going to talk to Tony that way. And the same thing with Orndorff. He wouldn't have talked to Orndorff that way, you know. Bill thought he had to bully people to get things done his way, you know, which was completely different than the other guys I worked with. They would finesse you to do whatever you felt. If they asked you to do something, you couldn't turn it down.
So you also worked the Memphis territory. What are your memories of working there?
I came in there and it was down, and Jarrett came to me, Jerry, and said, what do you think's wrong? I said, the babyfaces are going over. He said, you got an idea? I said, yeah, beat Lawler with Jimmy Hart. It was me and Honky Tonk, Wayne Ferris back in the day, will be the special referees. We'll really screw them. And they drew about 15 grand that night. And then I said, we're going to be Dundee too. And I remember that night when they drew the 15 grand, I said, you got to be Dundee tonight, and we'll get Lawler next week. So we beat Dundee, and he came in, and I remember Bill and I are friends, and he said, just killed the town. And he said, this is babyface territory. And Jimmy Hart went out and did an extraordinary job of promoting the towns on the local radio. We did 37 grand the next week. But they fell back into that pattern of babyfaces going over. And I understand where Lawler was, but this is the pattern that I've never liked. You're a babyface, you're a heel, you're a babyface, you're a heel. And in my heart, I think that if you turn that many times, the people lose interest in you, and it makes it harder for you to start doing angles because they're thinking, oh, is he going to turn one way or the other again? And I think they fell into a pattern. And the other thing, they had a little bit of comedy, a little bit more than a little bit. And the thing that nobody remembers about Memphis when Jarrett took it over, they got the #1 station for an hour and a half live. There was no other TV. Memphis didn't have cable, mostly didn't have cable. Cable was almost non-existent in Memphis. The St. Louis TV didn't come in. Vern's TV didn't come in. Watts' TV didn't come in. So they were the only show in town. And then getting on that prime spot they had on Saturday mornings for an hour and a half, which was nothing but an infomercial for their territory. And then they took over Lexington and Louisville from Nick, because Nick had ran those towns into the ground, and now they're doing the hot angles off of Memphis, so it popped. And I think them being isolated, and this is no disrespect for Lawler, because he's drawn a ton of money. I've worked with Jerry in Memphis and Florida. He had some good talent go through there. Tommy Rich, Austin Idol, Cornette started there, the First Family, Midnight Express. They've had some good talent go through there. And when you don't have, at that time, when you don't have anything to compare it with, you know, it means a big difference.
And recently a lot of people have, such as Bruce Pritchard and a lot of smart mark types, have bashed Jerry Jarrett quite a lot. Do you think that's kind of unnecessary, or does he deserve it, or was he actually a pretty good booker? Obviously he had a territory for a long time and was successful.
He was very successful. He was smart. He was able to see what he had in Lawler when a lot of people didn't see it. He had Dundee, who could really work when he wanted to. Him and Billy Robinson had some incredible matches. When Robinson went in there, he wasn't having good matches until he worked with Bill Dundee. I just think that they fell into that pattern we were just talking about. Babyface heel, babyface heel, babyface heel. And I think he fell into the pattern that, like I said, what I learned from Vince, don't fall into a pattern, that he fell in the pattern, and it didn't work. The big run they had after we were there was the Moondogs, because the Moondogs beat the shit out of people like the way you work. They made it look legit, and that's when they had their last big run. After that, it was back to switching guys up and around, and I never thought their work was as solid as other territories. So for me, bashing him, I can't bash him because he was successful. Could he have been more successful? Maybe so, but I don't know him that well to bash him. If I knew him better, maybe I would, but he was all right with me.
And did you ever work with Bruiser Brody at all in your career?
Yeah. The crazy thing was, I was the heel 90% of the time.
Oh, really?
I worked with him, and Bruiser, I worked with him in New York. I used to get the guys ready for Bruno. That was my position. I'd get wins, and they put me with Calhoun, or he put me with the Giant in the special attraction matches. And then I would put Hanson over, I would put Brody over, I put Patera over, and that was my job. But then later on in life, when he was booking San Antonio and I was booking Florida, I would bring him in and he'd be the babyface, because, you know, the famous match with Luger, where Luger climbed down the cage, and we...
oh, were you there that night?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was my first night back. And I asked him why he did. He said, I have a family and I'm afraid that he's going to hurt me. So, and Brody, I thought Brody's work was so believable, but Frank would do things about, we'll talk about patterns. You ever see Frank Brody drop kick? Bruiser Brody drop kick?
Oh, of course, yeah.
It doesn't, you grab your seat and you say to yourself, how can a big man do that? He didn't do it all the time, but he showed that he was a wrestler too. And he just had that look of a wild man, and his work was solid. And, he had an influence from Mark Lewin, and he had an influence from King Curtis, where they were big on the blood. And I think Brody got it there. Plus, him and Gary were partners for a while. And when I say partners, Gary Hart was his manager, which helped him in Texas. But he was big in St. Louis. I mean, he was big everywhere he went.
And do you think, like, that the company had some responsibility too in related to his death? Because there was quite a cover-up there, and there's a lot of talk that the company actually owed him a good amount of money at the time that he was killed.
I heard that too, and I don't know what happened, but they let him lay on the floor for 45 minutes, and...
Yeah, that's the thing I don't get, because WWC is so connected in Puerto Rico.
Right.
If they really wanted an ambulance, they could have got an ambulance there really fast.
You just hit the nail on the head. Carlos had a lot of stroke on that island, you know that.
Yeah.
And for him to lay on the floor for 45 minutes, and he was alive when he left.
He wasn't taken right away when he arrived at the hospital either, from what I understand.
Yeah, and my point of view is, how could this happen and the guy get away with it?
And wrestle the same night and then continue to keep his job.
Yeah, and they never fired him. And the other thing was, from what I talked to Dutch, was he got the summons to be in court 5 days after the trial. Nobody seemed to, and then they took it like a real wrestling match that Jose said he was afraid to death of him. And they showed some clips of Brody. There was more to this than we know, and we'll never know the answer. The only people that know the answer to that is Jose, Carlos, and maybe Jovica. And if it wasn't for Victor Chionis, the ambulance may never have gotten there. And then Tony Atlas had to carry the big guy out. And it was a sad day. Sad day.
Your most famous rivalry, one of them was probably with Dusty Rhodes.
Yeah.
Can you just talk about why that feud was so successful?
Because I think we were on the opposite ends of the spectrum. Dusty was the crazy thing. I wrestled Dusty for 3 years almost every night in some kind of a single, me and Mark, me and Roop, with him and Mulligan, or him and Barry Windham. I never heard one fan yell out, "You're fat, Dusty." And he was one of them. He talked right at them. And this was a generation of people that came to the matches. Florida was still, except for Miami, was still a kind of a wide open redneck state. And what Dusty drew was country western music lovers and beer drinkers and guys with pickup trucks and gun racks in the back. And I was the exact opposite, and I think that's what it was two cultures trying to fight one another. And he just was their man.
And I guess you figured out a way to deal with his ego where you were able to handle it over all those years.
Yeah, I mean, as often as he would beat us, the heels, he had a tendency to allow us to get the heat back after the match. So it was like we didn't care if we won or lost, as long as we tried to destroy him, and that was to destroy the American dream. And he would lay down occasionally, and when he did, it was at the right time, like the Christmas show, and then when I came back, where had been suspended, and he was going to wrestle Flair, and I threw the ink and hit his sister, and he went on strike, wouldn't wrestle Flair, and we did a big angle about the suspension being lifted. Somebody reminded me, it was Don Owens that voted against me. Bob Geigel voted against me as the president. Crockett voted that the suspension should be lifted. I can't remember, I think whoever Watts had as his front man asked for the suspension to be lifted. Then, of course, Eddie became the ultimate babyface by lifting the suspension. So our first match was in Lakeland, and he did the job in the middle of the ring for me. So he knew when it was time for him to lay down.
Now, his son Cody quit the WWE last year. I
Right.
guess he claimed that he wasn't getting his chance, even though they gave him numerous pushes over his, I guess, 10-year or so career. What are your thoughts on Cody?
Well, I think there's a backlash towards the WWE. And I think one of the backlashes that really got Cody over, when he can't use the Rhodes name. I mean, that infuriated people in the business, not only the fans, but people in the business. And that helped him. It also helped him that he went in and he beat almost everybody. I don't know about him doing jobs. There's other companies. I was in for signing for a company right outside of Charlottesville, Virginia, 2 weeks ago, and they drew 1,700 people. I go to PCW and they're doing $90,000 houses. Seattle, they have a building that there's 450 people, and they charge enormous ticket prices. So now you're starting to see different pockets pop up. And I think it's the programming that how long can you see, as good as these guys are, how many times can you see Cena and Orton wrestle each other? How many times can you go against what the people want? You know, and they also do a lot of 50-50 booking. Finn wins the other night against AJ, and then the next night he gets beat. So what you did for Finn on the pay-per-view, you just sucked everything out of it to give it to Kane, because obviously Kane's going to work with Braun. I just think that the people now, like Cody and other territories, I would like to see if one of them could get on a television program and see what they could do. And the smartest thing anybody could do if they got a television program is just take an hour and a half at the max. And I think you'd see things come around. And from what I gather, you know better than I, some of these kids are making six figures, and they're not running the same schedules that the guys in the WWE are. And I've heard a lot of clamor, whether it's true or not, that a lot of people are unhappy. A lot of people have asked for their release. So something's going on, and maybe we're seeing a revolution.
I think there's a big pay scale difference on the independents between wrestlers. There's a lot of the lower card guys making little to nothing, and then obviously some of them are doing great, actually, as you mentioned, making probably the same or more than WWE.
Yeah, and I've thought about that too. I think it's like the business has always been that way. You know, you've promote. It's your money on the line. You got a idea, you know. It's all figures. It's like being an accountant. You got to draw money to have another show. So if you have to pay wrestler X amount of dollars, you got to make that up somewhere down the line. And hopefully, if you can't pay, it isn't that you want to pay these kids less, but they need the experience. But you're hoping, and now that I know you, you're hoping your guy that you the local guy is going to get over for you, so you can pay him more. So the guy that's on the card says, well, he started making $100, now he's making $400. If I work as hard as he does, maybe I'll work up to that 400. Because the business is talent driven, unless you have good talent. And I'm a firm believer that you have to have talent all the way up the card. It's got to be boom, boom, like a song to a crescendo. And it's hard for these kids because there's so many of them that will undercut themselves because they want to be seen. And with social media, I got to be working because I have to get my name out there, so I'll work for this amount of money where I know I should be getting more. But the bottom line is, I don't think these local promoters and independent promoters are trying to rip anybody off. I think they're trying to give the next show money for the next show to pay a talent that's has a little bit more exposure and that will fit into your system. And as the houses grow, you can start paying the kids a little bit more. And then eventually the guy that you're paying that big money to, you've had him for 6 shows, you can't have him for the 7th show. So somebody's got to step up. And if you've got a guy for 6 shows or 5 shows in the opening or second match, if he doesn't move up, you got to replace him and try somebody else.
And I've heard you talk positively about Jinder Mahal before. He's from Great North Wrestling. He's wrestled for us in the past. So I just wanted to see if you could give your opinion on him.
Okay. Since the internet has come along, a lot of us have become trolls. Okay. What we don't understand is history and geography. We're a country of approximately 350 million people. India is a country of 1,350,000,000. They're playing to 1 billion more people. He's one of them. If I was running that, I'd get a Pakistani to be the heel and go to India, because Pakistan was once part of India. It was separated when they became independent, and there's heat there. I mean, so they haven't seen a celebrity being the champion since way back in the 50s with Dara Singh when he wrestled Lou Thez and King Kong. So it's been a long run for them not having a local hero. I didn't know he worked for you. I think he transformed his body. I think this kid's must have a tremendous work ethic. And let him grow. Let's not just dump on him. Let him grow. And I bet you when they go to India, they'll draw with him. They'll draw with him.
And when you started working for Jim Crockett Promotions in '87, were you hired to be a wrestler, or also were you on the booking side?
I was a wrestler, but they brought me in the office, and I got a salary also in the office. It was Dusty, JJ, and myself, and I was kind of the guy that would come up with some ideas here and there. But if there was 2 towns running and Dusty wasn't working, JJ would go to one and I'd go the other, but we'd get the finishes from Dusty. Then we'd have to report how the matches were the next day.
And you worked with Cactus Jack and Buzz Sawyer. It's part of this Slaughterhouse group in those days. What were your thoughts on Cactus in the early days?
Well, I never thought, I knew he was going to be good, but I never thought he'd become the star he was, because the thing was, I thought he could maybe become the #1 guy in WCW, but when he went to New York, he was against the mold that Vince had all the big jack bodybuilders. And I said, I think they're going to lose him in the shuffle. But when, he came in there as Mankind, it really stuck out. and he took some horrible bumps, you know what I mean? The one off the cage and through the cage, and he busts his ass to get where he is. I would love to have seen what would have happened if Buzz and him had stayed together with me, because Buzz was a solid performer. He was legit amateur wrestler, and the dynamics between those two was completely different. Buzz took good bumps too, but nothing like Cactus. And Cactus was a little bit more showman than Buzz. Even though Buzz was a showman, Buzz was solid work. I worked a lot with Buzz and as a team with Buzz. I think that was a lost chance because of Jim Herd.
And Buzz was another guy, from what I understand, that was legitimately insane.
He was crazy. Crazy. I mean, I saw him do some crazy stuff. I mean, you know, he had demons and we didn't know what happened to him, but he was, something wasn't right there. I mean, he would eat 2 Big Macs and drink half a liter of Coke. Go work for 45 minutes after he ate it. Halfway through the match, he'd crawl underneath the ring and puke his guts out, slobber it off, and then continue the match non-stop pace.
And just finally on Cactus Jack, what do you think of Shane McMahon copying his cage bump recently?
Here's the thing. I think Shane McMahon did that to show the boys that he'll do anything to get stuff over, but he hadn't been in the ring for quite a while. He's lucky. I've heard that he cracked ribs and maybe got something wrong with his spleen. He's lucky that he's alive. I hope to God he never does it again, because you can't advertise he's going to do that. So the people that came didn't know he was going to go off the cage. I think he took a chance on his life, and I don't think Cactus had taken wild bumps before, and I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, the top of that cage wasn't supposed to go through,
No,
right?
according to the
story, right?
Yeah.
And if you look, the tooth is in his nose, and he's lucky he didn't get hurt. But the jump for Cactus, I could see him doing that.
Yeah.
Because that was his style. Okay, it's a lot higher, but when he first came in, I beat his tag team partner, but after the match, I had him slam the guy on the floor and run down the apron. Jimmy Cornette told me about, and dive and drop an elbow on the guy on concrete. I'd never seen that before. So I think him jumping off the cage was a lot safer, him jumping off the cage, because he has done crazy bumps before, than Shane, who'd been away from the business for a long time, doing that.
And the other thing that I noticed about that is when Shane did it, it just looked like a stunt. It didn't look, first of all, the timing seemed off for the thing with Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn.
Yeah.
Kevin was already getting up, and then it just seemed like a planned stunt, whereas when Foley did it, it seemed like it could have happened in the course of a match.
Yeah, so. Absolutely.
And I'm managing Oz in WCW.
I have always wondered, was Dusty afraid that Kevin Nash was jacked? He's legitimately 6'10". You've worked with him.
Oh, yeah.
Is he 6'10"? 6'11"?
Oh, definitely, at least that, yeah.
Yeah. Now they put me in a rubber mask as the Wizard, give him a cone on his head, spray paint his hair gray. We have Janie Ingalls walking down like Dorothy, and that backdrop cost $100,000. It was, I don't know if Dusty wanted to make a movie, and this was his pilot to show some movie director, but it certainly didn't help Kevin. And Kevin, I mean, guys 6'11" that looked like Kevin, don't come along every day. And Kevin's a very smart guy.
Probably one of the smartest in this business.
Absolutely. And I'm always have wondered if Dusty was afraid of Kevin.
Can you tell the story about the monkey?
Yeah. Todd, this is past the statute of limitations. Dusty comes up with an idea, I'm going to carry a monkey on a leash. Well, the little bastard, every time they put, first of all, he was biting everybody before they put the leash on him. He's supposed to be a trained monkey. I realize now he's not trained. The handle is jumping back. He bit the handle. So they give him to me. I get him on the leash. First thing the little bastard does, starts humping my leg. I have to whack him in the head, right? So I'm supposed to be walking down the aisle with the monkey. The monkey jumps off the runway. I go to pull him up, snap. I'm dragging a dead monkey down the aisle. It was deplorable, I mean. And I wonder if, again, that if Dusty, that was such a cartoon. And if it wasn't done for a pilot, it had to be done for another reason. Maybe he's going to show someone, look what I created. This is an entrance. We could do a TV show. But that killed Kevin.
So when you did the Oz character, who was running WCW at that time?
Dusty, yeah.
I mean, was it Herd that would have been in charge, or was it...
Herd was in charge, but this was Dusty's idea.
It was his idea.
And,
So Herd would have been the first guy in charge when Turner took over.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts when Turner bought Crockett out?
It was a funny thing. They had an acquisition guy come around, talk to wrestlers. His name was Blair Underwood, and a lot of the guys didn't like him, and I didn't understand it because we were going to get contracts. And this was the first time I had ever heard of a wrestler, some wrestlers had gotten contracts before, but this was a blanket deal. I couldn't understand why guys were being rude to the guy. So we kind of got a friendship going. But then when Herd came in, and he was as abrasive as Watts, if not more, and he had no idea about the wrestling business. He was in the pizza business, but before that he was a station manager in St. Louis where they taped wrestling, so they thought he knew something. After all, it's wrestling, it's fake, it can't be that tough. But my greatest thought of Jim Herd is when he had the ding-dongs and the bell. We were at a meeting and he's going through all this stuff. He wanted to cut Ric Flair's hair and give him a trident to be
Spartacus, yeah.
And I said, well, why don't we just go to Yankee Stadium or race Babe Ruth's number 3, make it 49. He didn't get it, so he comes up with an idea. We're all sitting around the table, Cornette, me, Flair, and he says, I got the greatest idea. And we said, what's that? He said, Hunchbacks. A team called the Hunchbacks. I said, what? He said, yeah, they can't be pinned because they're hunchback. So I looked over at Jimmy, and Jimmy, Jimmy, how crazy he can get, right? He was so taken back he couldn't even talk. So I said, Jim, that's a great idea, but I got a great way to beat them. He said, what is it? I said, well, let's put the Rock and Roll Express against them, and we'll go to Turner Stadium where the Braves play, and we'll put the ring in the dirt. And Punky, during the match, will take one of them outside, nail him, and he's got a shovel, and he'll dig a hole and put him down so his shoulders are down and pin him 1, 2, 3. He says, I love it, let's do it. So I get up to go to the bathroom. Gordon comes in the bathroom with me, and he goes, Kevin, why? And I said, he'll never do it. He said, don't be surprised if he doesn't do it. And then, if you remember the first time the Ding Dongs wrestled, all the bells fell off their costume. And then he had Big Josh, who was Matt Bourne, who could wrestle his ass off. He had Fireman Freddie, he brought in all kinds of characters. And it was just so bizarre because we were the diametrically opposed to Vince's stuff, where he had characters and we had wrestling. We should have stayed what we were trying to do. He set WCW back at least 3 years.
And were you friends with Ric Flair at this time when he was going through all the problems with her?
Yeah. I actually had to fly Rick home one time. He couldn't fly by himself. He was really cracked. And I got him on the plane, and Ole said to me, "Why'd you miss the town?" I told him. He said, "Yeah, I understand." And I think that Hurd loved picking on Flair, because Flair would fight back. And when he said about the Spartacus thing and the earrings in his ear, Rick was aghast because he had just signed his contract. You could see in his head, boy, what a mistake I made. I should have went to WWE now and they can hold me hostage. So he fell apart, and I think I would have handled it differently, hopefully, but I'm not so sure I would have.
What did you think about them letting him go and then him going to WWE and having the WCW title?
Well, the thing about it was, I don't know how they didn't. You can't ride a guy like this, okay? Then he goes home. I think I would have got a lawyer immediately to send a letter and say, you need to return the belt in X amount of days, or we're going to sue you for theft. Because I'm not sure how that belt, back in the day, you used to have to put a deposit for that belt, so things like this wouldn't happen. Now, I don't know if the company, Turner, I'm surmising that Turner paid whoever for the belt, and it was their property, because it ended back up with WCW. And then they put a cease and desist order on Vince, and they had to digitize the belt out, if you remember.
Yeah, well, I think they did that because he had to send the belt back at that time, so they just had like a different belt. And
okay.
That's what I heard Flair say.
Okay.
And also the reason why he was able to take the title home was because he did have a deposit on it,
right,
and they hadn't paid him the deposit back.
Okay.
So that explains that part.
Yeah, and I said the deposit, so there it is. Yeah.
So I guess your friendship with Flair dates back a long way.
Oh,
then.
I knew when I first went to Charlotte. I met Rick. I'll tell you a story. I remember going up with Dusty was booking Florida in the early '70s, and him having a picture of a 300-pound kid and saying, "This is going to be the next star here." His name is Rick Rhodes. He was supposed to be Dusty's little brother. And then I met Rick in Charlotte, and we've been friends ever since.
And do you know how he's doing now?
He seems to be doing okay, but I mean, he's been through some trials and tribulations with his health problem. I hope to God that, he doesn't go back to what got him into the hospital.
Yeah. And I guess the toughest part, and I'm not saying this in a bad way, but like, if you're used to drinking every day of your life, to not be able to drink anymore would be extremely tough to accomplish.
I think so too, but I think if they tell you the next drink may be your last one, you'd think twice, hopefully.
And what led to you leaving WCW for around this time?
I got in a big argument with Hurd, and he didn't want to renegotiate my contract, and I got an offer to go to Japan. So I decided, I actually thought he couldn't last much longer. And I thought if there was 6 months I'd be back. It was a year and a half before, almost 2 before I was back.
And at that point, I guess you went to FMW and then Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
Yeah.
Do you think Smoky Mountain Wrestling, if it was run a little different, could have continued on as a territory, or was it just too much for one person to handle.
I think if Jimmy had gotten, see, the only big town he had was Knoxville, and he was doing quite well in Knoxville. And Johnson City, he did fair. And if he could have gotten Lexington, Louisville, Cincinnati, and Chattanooga, and once in a while went to Birmingham or something, I think he could have done it. I think some of the problem was, which we talked about earlier, was he had some talent here, but here wasn't the greatest. And they had been used to seeing when the Fullows had it from top to bottom. So I think that hurt him a little, and not having the ability. See, Ronald had the southern end too. So Ronald had, if he didn't do well, we'll say one town in the north end of Southeastern Championship Wrestling in the Knoxville end, and the southern end, that town may pull both of them. You know, Jimmy just didn't have the towns to keep going.
And a lot of people don't remember this, but you actually spent time in ECW too.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that in those early days of ECW?
Yeah, I actually brought Paulie in, and he was put with the guy that was his friend. He brought him down, and he was called Tombstone, and on his back he had Scott Hall, the date of his birth, born and died in a question mark, and Scott was back in Florida. He had been in Minneapolis, and I said to Scott every night, when he jumps up on the apron, just nail him as hard as you can. And he did every night, and Paul would dust himself off and get back up. And I said, after about the third night, I said, leave him alone. The kid's going to make it. And when I went to work for him for ECW, Taz and I were the tag champions for him for a while. I wrestled the Sheik there. I wrestled Abby numerous times. One time it was me and Abby against Funk and Hanson. Paul did a remarkable job. What he did was he took Florida Championship Wrestling, because he had Shane Douglas as his champion, who was a wrestler, but he had violence underneath and had some wrestling matches, but he made those guys that had never had a break believe in themselves. And he had those guys believe in themselves so much they could run through walls. He also had Terry Funk. You know, Terry's the most beloved guy in this business, as you know, and this is over 20 years ago. Terry is a genius at finishes. He helped Paul. Tommy Dreamer was coming into his own. I wrestled Tommy when he was very young. Taz was coming into his own. Shane Douglas and Candido and Bigelow, that was a great threesome. Sandman, Sabu, Raven, Public Enemy, I could go down the line. They had a host of good guys. But the guys underneath, like 911, he was a big guy, but he couldn't work. But Paul had him choke slamming guys. I actually stole that from Paul when I gave it to the Giant when he first started.
Yeah.
Because I figured, can't make a mistake on a choke slam, you know. And Paul did that with 911 and he drew. And then there was the kid from Florida that just recently died, the Shah. He would punch people and go, Shah, Shah, and the whole building would start to say. My problem with what I think Paul did was he tried to expand too fast. He tried to go down to Florida. He tried to go to Chicago. I think if he had stayed from
Louisiana even at one point.
Yeah, I think if he had stayed from Maine, North Maine, down to Baltimore, across maybe to Columbus, you know, that section, he would have been very, very successful, and it would have been had a chance to really blossom. But it's amazing what they did. It's amazing.
And when you came back to WCW, the rumor is that Hogan had recommended that you be brought back in. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah. That was the way I came back in, yeah.
And I guess Eric Bischoff would have been in charge at that time?
Yes, yes.
What were your initial thoughts on him?
Eric was the right guy at the right time for that corporate company. I mean, he went over and sold. I actually thought Tony Schiavone was going to run the company. And he went over and sold himself to them and did a good job of selling themselves. I mean, he opened up the purse strings and got, Nash, Hall, Randy, Six. He got Kurt. He got a lot of great talent. But I kind of think Eric's one mistake that I see was when he became the manager of NWO. Not that that was a bad thing, but I hated them expanding the NWO. To me, there was four guys, like the Four Horsemen. There was Hogan, Nash, Hall, and Six. It should have stayed that way. They were starting to think you could throw T-shirts at guys and get them over. It overcompensated. First, they came in and they were dead-ass heels. And then I saw something, and in Dayton, Ohio, there was a riot, and it was because the wrestling fans had a WCW flag and the other ones had an NWO flag, and they were fighting each other. I said, boy, this is unique. They would come down and pick the bones of whoever was left on the losing end. If the Dungeon of Doom wrestled the Horsemen beat us, we would lay it down. They would come down and pick us off. Then we did the famous one in Orlando, where we broke kayfabe, we're wrestling, and Jimmy comes running out, just floating, baby, just floating, but they're here. We went back and he speared Rey Mysterio. They actually called the switchboard and thought there was an assault. Cops showed up and everything. So the people really bought into that. Now, the thin line is people knew that Eric was the general manager, or whatever his position was, of WCW. I think that if he had stayed as a babyface and said, we got to put these guys out, we got to bring guys in to fight them, or we got to unite, I think it could have lasted longer than making everybody members of the NWO. And then there was the NWO Black and White, NWO Wolfpack, New Latin Order. It just came. We talk about patents. That was the patent.
So at that point, you didn't have full control.
No,
it was a committee situation.
No.
So who would have been
Hogan had it at the time then. Yeah.
So the idea for the multiple groups would have been Hogan and Nash and their...
Yeah, and I don't even think Kevin wanted the multiple groups, but he went along because he saw that he wasn't going to swim against the tide. And as you said, he's probably the smartest guy in the wrestling business.
And I've heard you say on your podcast that when Hogan actually decided to turn, not decided, you convinced him to turn heel, he spent the night at your house.
Yeah.
Because you were afraid that he was going to change his mind.
Everybody was telling me, you can't do it, your merchandise will go down, your merchandise. I waited until the second match was on, I drove with him with his limo, and then when he turned, we all can go back and watch that tape. They had more trash in that ring than most garbage dumps do.
At what point did you become that close with Hogan that...
I knew him before he was in the wrestling business. I knew him when he played at the Rocket Lounge. I knew him. I gave him a ride one night. I worked in Dothan one night from Florida, and they sent me there, and he was on the card and he was drawing, but he didn't think he was going to get a break. I said, yeah, you're going to get a break and you're going to draw a lot of money, because again, I saw Billy Graham in him. I said, this kid's going to make it. And I think that's, maybe he remembered that I told him that.
Are you still close with them today? Or?
No, he's more recluse, I think. I don't talk to him today. You know, I have no ill feelings for him. I hope he does well, but I don't talk to him, no.
And I guess he'll probably eventually be back in WWE, do you think? Or actually, that reminds me. I actually heard you say on your podcast that you've heard him in the past throw around racist terms, I guess. So maybe you think they might not bring him back because something else could pop up.
Well, I think it may, you know, if there's one tape out there, there may be another. But the main thing is, because Linda McMahon is on the cabinet, she's the head of the Small Business Administration, I don't think they need any more heat. And I think, you know, all you need today is for one person to say it, take something out of contents, and, you know, he'd be in a... And they're very, very concerned about their public image now. And rightfully so.
And of course, he had that sex tape come out. What do you think about like the wrestling business connection to like pornography and sex tapes and sexual pictures lately? Because we've had Mickey James, I understand, has done a porn, China, X-Pac, Sonny, I guess.
Yeah.
And all these divas, I guess Paige and all these other divas have videos and pictures coming out.
I don't understand how anybody would leak a video of themselves, you know, knowing that your job is on the line. I just don't understand it, and I can't believe that they let some of them come back, because they're a publicly traded company, and they gear a lot of their stuff to kids, and everybody can get on the internet or iPad or anything and pull that up. I just don't understand the whole thing. And the thing with Hogan, I mean, that was Bubba's wife. That thing is very bizarre to me, and I can't understand. I mean, it's just. So
Wasn't he in the house?
What?
Wasn't Bubba in the house?
Yeah, he was in the house, and I don't know. Maybe Hogan was going through a posing routine too. I mean, I that is so. You know, you weren't with us today when we went and did the interview with Cowhead, and he brought that up, you know, and his producer was the one that exposed that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because his producer was also Bubba's producer, and Bubba gave him the tapes to hold. Why would you do that? So, I don't know. That's a very strange one. That's beyond me.
Yeah, but I guess it paid off in the end. He's getting supposedly a payout or something.
Yeah, I'm sure he did, but I'm sure the guy that put the money up
is getting a percent, because he didn't have enough money to pay the lawyers or something.
Yeah, I'm sure the guy that put the money up took the biggest portion of that.
Right, because it only, I believe they settled for like 30 million.
Yeah.
Something like that. And speaking of Hogan, of course, Ed Leslie, I'm sure he's worked for us lots, and he was in WCW. What was the reason why he had probably the record for most gimmicks in WCW?
Well, Hogan would give him a gimmick to keep him a job. I like Brutus. He's a great guy. But I think he relied on Hogan so much that he thought, oh, Hogan will give me another gimmick if this doesn't work. And they've been best friends for years, so...
Not anymore, though. They're enemies now.
Yeah, that's amazing to me. Do you know what that caused it? I don't.
What he told me is it has something to do with Brutus's new wife.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, no, they're strictly enemies now. At least from the last time we talked to Brutus. Which was your favorite of all those gimmicks?
Can I I say none of the above?
And the one that was actually kind of impressive because he completely changed his look was the Disciple.
Absolutely. I saw him one night, and you know how you do a double take? He was standing in the ring, and he had that bronze tan, and he had a six-pack, and he was ripped to the max. I mean, ripped. I'm saying, wow, he looked great. And that was, if he hadn't gone through all those transitions, if he had come in as that, he might have been able to draw some money.
And he was put with the Ultimate Warrior. I think you were still in charge at that point.
Yeah.
What was it like, the whole Ultimate Warrior debacle?
See, that Ultimate Warrior thing was Hogan getting the win back. That bothered him, that he did a job for Ultimate Warrior. And that was the whole thing to bring him back. And the business had changed then. You look at the talent I had underneath, there was a lot of wrestling, then we had the violence with NWO, and then here comes the Warrior, and it's completely offset to what the wrestling was, but this was Hulk's way of getting the win back, that he put them over at WrestleMania. Strange. You know, he put himself ahead of business.
And what was it like? Because I understand that the Warrior went on. He wasn't like paying attention to the timings or anything for TV, and when he would give his speeches, he would just talk for as long as he wanted.
He was oblivious to time. His ranting and ravings were that of a lunatic. You know, okay, let's compare this. How does one guy see this guy as the big draw who has very limited experience? I'm not talking ill about the dead, it's just the truth. Very limited experience. His interviews are ranting and raving, and there's no room for superstar Billy Graham.
Yeah, exactly. And was there any personal talks that you had or dealings with the Warrior that stand out to you from that time?
Say, I knew him when he was a bodybuilder. Mr. George used to train at Doc's gym when I was training. And he was always very pleasant to me. Maybe because I knew him when, but he was off, and he hated Hulk. You've seen the interviews. I mean, he hated him. And I think he was somewhat, even though he was rambling, I think it was, and he rambled up there too, right? I think he, meaning WWE, when he was up there, I think he was doing this to kind of goad Hogan. You know, like, I'm going to take as much time as I want. You got controlling interest in this, so I'm going to try to squash your action here. Yeah.
And he hated Hulk right up until his dying days because he was putting out YouTube videos revealing all kinds of dirt on Hulk.
I mean, real wild shit. Yeah, I saw them too, the YouTube thing.
According to Hulk, I don't believe this, but just like he said with Randy, that they miraculously secretly made up before their deaths.
No.
But, and for the match itself, which had to have been one of the worst matches in the pay-per-view history for main events. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I wanted to get a noose and hang myself. I mean, you know that. It set us back, and I can understand Hulk wanting creative control in his matches, but then it started to drip over, and you know, he let Piper beat him twice, right?
Yeah.
In a non-title match.
Yeah, that didn't make any sense.
And we didn't announce it was a non-title on one of the pay-per-views until the week before, or the night off. I mean, it was just, he held grudges, and him and Piper never got along either, you know? So there was three. There was Warrior, Piper, and Randy, and I don't think they miraculously made up.
Oh, I know for a fact, because at one point I was friends with Lanny Poffo, that
yeah.
there's no way Randy made up with Hogan because he despised Hogan
Yeah,
at the time of his death.
yeah.
But same with WWE. I don't think Randy would have been too happy that Lanny gave the blessing to go in the Hall of Fame.
I'm not sure about that one either.
Yeah.
And I think Lanny did it out of the goodness of his heart because he wanted his brother in there.
I'm sure he also got a good payment out of it.
Yeah.
And before delay with Randy, I'm sure you knew him. Any thoughts on the years that you knew him?
Yeah, I mean, again, I was there when Randy was coming into WWF under a mask doing jobs when he was playing baseball in the Cincinnati Reds organization. And this is how intense the guy was. He was a catcher, and there was a collision at the plate, and he broke his right arm, which was his all catchers right-handed, catch with the left hand, throw with the right. He would throw with his left hand 10,000 tennis balls a day against the backboard. And he learned to be a left-handed first baseman. That's intensity. And then I hadn't seen Randy when he was with WCW and he left for a while. Or he took time off, you remember? And he came back,
Yeah.
the Spider-Man movie?
Yeah, he was massive.
I didn't even recognize him. And I've known Randy for... Randy and I were in a bodybuilding contest together. I showed him how to draw the abs on. I was an open, he was a novice. I mean, so and Randy and I were very good friends. Randy was a good guy to me, you know.
And I guess you both live in Florida, so you ran into each other.
Yeah.
And just to quickly go through the Dungeon of Doom gimmick, which I actually liked.
Yeah.
Was that, I guess, Hulk Hogan had something to do with that? He wanted a group of cartoonish people.
Here's what it was. I manipulated that too because I had to get his faith because he was the one that suggested me for the job. I'll never forget, in Chicago, he had a black shirt on, Hogan. He was just going to do an interview. Black bandana, black crucifix on, and he comes out and the whole building is booing him. And Mean Gene was on top of things so strongly, he said, "You can see it's a solemn mood tonight. The people are upset over the NWO, right?" And I said, "Oh, I got to turn him now. I should have turned him as he came in." But I gave him the guys that he had worked with before, that he was comfortable around, that were easy to work for him. You know, he didn't like to get touched, you know what I mean? You and him would have been oil and water. He doesn't like, and these guys were his friends. You know, Ed Leslie, the Shark, you know, John Tenta,
Ming, I guess.
Ming was, you know, Ming was looking out for him if they ever went out. You know, Barb, and then that group kept on growing and growing and growing. A lot of times, and I look back fondly at it sometimes, but when I was doing it, I felt like I was coming out of the clown car, you know, because I had been such a staunch shield that I'm got all these characters around me, and it didn't work. But in the long run, it did because I talked him into turning heel.
For Ming, everyone always loves to hear the stories about Ming. Do you have any stories on Ming?
Yeah, I've told the story, and I saw him today.
I'm actually wrestling him next year, so...
Oh, good!
Yes,
You
I
guys will
issued
have
the
a-
challenge today.
Yeah!
And it seems like he's going to accept.
You guys will have a great match. I never thought the Goozle was a real deal. We were coming out of, I think it was Houma, Louisiana. I know it was Houma, Louisiana. And it was a back road back to get to the interstate. And there, it was in the middle of nowhere. And we saw a bar, and the guys wanted to get beer. I did too. And you could buy beer in a bar to take. So we order beer to go. The girl's getting our order, and out of the corner of my eye, I see Ming at the bar, and he takes a double Jack Daniels and goes, "Fool." I said, "Oh, hurry up, miss, please." Next thing he goes, he puts some money on the pool table, and two guys are playing pool. And they said, "Hey, we don't let N's play here." And the guy, and Ming said something to the guy, and the guy came over, and Ming goozled him, and as he was dropping him, he grabbed the guy by the shirt and pulled it up and bit him like a werewolf and spit it out. And the other guy hit him with a pool stick, and he turned around, grabbed the guy like he was going to kiss him by the head, and bit off his nose and spit it on the floor. I said, "Forget about the beer." We got into the car, and I'm driving as fast as I can to get to the interstate. I said, I saw a field, like something was growing, but it was a dirt road. I drove halfway down it, turned the car around, shut the lights off, and we're waiting. About 4 minutes later, bing, 5 or 6 cop cars go by. I said, "Boys, it looks like a dry night, and we're going to be sitting here for a while." I sat for about 45 minutes, and then they came back the other way. I came out and rather heading toward the interstate. I looked at the map. I went back to Homer and went up and around. It took us like forever to get back. J.J. Dillon said to me today, if I was ever in a foxhole and they were attacking me and I didn't have a gun, that's who I want beside me. You know, the legend now has become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, but he was a very, very dangerous man. You know, ask Jesse Barr. Jesse Barr doesn't have an eye.
Yeah, that was the infamous Barr incident with him. He got in a lot. Jesse Barr was a bit of a troublemaker. He got in a few scraps and wasn't successful. Yeah,
he thought he was much tougher than he was, and he definitely picked the wrong guy.
I think he started the whole thing when the Rockers got fired too in '88 in WWE. He caused like that whole incident. Yeah,
I could see that.
He was getting them going. And Vader spent a very short time in the Dungeon of Doom. Why was it so short? He just didn't fit in? Or?
No, they gave me Vader, and I said, no, this guy needs to be by himself. I mean, Vader drew money. You know Vader. He drew money. He was believable. I'm going to tell you a story that I've never said. Vader went downhill, and I saw it happen in 3 seconds. After this incident, he was never Big Van Vader again. I'm waiting for Vader to cut a promo. He can tell his story. I saw it.
He did actually tell us the story. I don't know if you saw that, his version to us, but...
I'll tell you the story. I was there. Paul comes to me and said, he's getting dressed. I said, we're going to start TV in a half hour, and these guys, Union production company, they got to have a break. We're lucky, they run a little overtime, they gave me leeway because they liked me. And I said, go tell him to come. No Vader. He ain't coming, he's getting dressed. So I marched down there, but Paul has left before me. Paul's got shorts on and flip-flops. Think about this, how the business changed, right? He's an agent.
Yeah, that was the one point that Vader said to us. He was saying that why would an agent, he was denying that Paul had flip-flops because he said an agent wouldn't be wearing flip-flops.
No, he was wearing flip-flops.
It was just an acceptable thing in WCW.
Yeah. So I see Paul, and I'm coming down the hallway, and this was at center stage. In the back of center stage, the stairs in the back of the hallway, you could see them go like this. And they had these big wooden boxes that they had production stuff in. Paul says, get out there, you gotta get out there now. And Vader went like that, and Paul turned, and he bear pawed him. Boom, in the face, and grabbed Paul as Paul was going down and front face locked and shoved him in the box. Well, I know Paul Orndorff forever, before he was a wrestler. And as they pulled him aside, everybody wanted to hold Paul back. I said, let them straighten this thing out. Paul went over with his bad arm and hit him right on the chin. Vader fell on his knees and Paul field goaled him right on the chin, and his head actually touched his heels, okay? Now everybody's mulling around. They pushed Paul into one of the dressing rooms. Vader, I gotta give him credit. He came in and said, let's go. And Ming stepped in and said, no, nothing's gonna happen. And both of them.
Yeah, that was the thing. That was the other thing that Vader pointed out. He said that he wasn't knocked out, and it was Ming that ultimately separated the fight. So I guess there is some
truth to it, but Paul field goaled him. But if he had cowboy boots on,
it would have been over.
It would have been over. It was over anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, his face was all swelled up. Yeah.
And that, unfortunately, as you said, that ended his time in WCW.
Yeah, he lost almost $1 million contract.
And he was unfortunately never used properly, really, in WWE.
No. And that's why I said that killed his career.
What was Sting like to work with?
Sting was a little bit aloof. I don't think he really liked the wrestling business. He was in it for the money, which we all are. It was Scott Hall's idea of the Crow, but he got into it with the NWO guys. I mean, when I say got into it, he really took that character on because he liked working with those guys and felt good with those guys. And one thing about Sting, if I wanted a rating, I could put Sting against Flair and I knew I had a rating. They worked well together. So maybe he wasn't aloof, but he carried himself differently, and maybe this is when he found God and he was becoming a different person. When I say aloof, before he mingled with the guys, this time he's staying back, and now that I look at him saying this and analyzing, he found God, and maybe he was trying to stay on the straight and narrow path.
And of course, one of your probably most famous feuds was with Brian Pillman, even though there was never really a blow off to it.
Yeah.
Who came up with that whole
Brian
situation?
Pillman. Let me tell you a story about Brian Pillman. We lost a wonderful performer, but we lost a genius. He told Terry Funk and me this angle that he wanted to do. You know, he played for the Cincinnati Bengals, and that was the year Cincinnati got into the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
He wanted to run while the game was on to the goalpost with chains, stripped naked while he was running, and chain himself to the goalpost. That would have stopped the Super Bowl game.
Yeah.
Who's going to get bolt cutters? Where are the bolt cutters? How long is it going to take?
Yeah.
It would have made nationwide news. He would have got arrested, probably gone for 30 days or 90 days for observation. But everybody would have known who he is, you know. And the angle we did was we kayfabed that, you know, that was his idea. He was a genius.
And I guess a lot of people believed it, even including the locker room,
Yeah.
from what I understand. Yeah.
Because Brian he was working, you know, I said about the Sheik was 24 hours working.
Yeah.
Nobody liked Brian at that time. You know, they thought he was crazy. They thought there's something wrong. You know, Brian stopped drinking. Then they're saying, is he taking some antidepressants and other drugs? This guy's crazy, you know. And when he said it in the meeting, and Eric said he could go home, and he left. And then we had this one match, the strap match. He comes running down. I mean, biggest compliment I ever got. Kevin Nash told me half the crew he was with bought the pay-per-view to see the shoot.
Oh, the WWE guys.
Yeah.
And of course, the other big one you're remembered for was against Chris Benoit in WCW. I mean, probably the bathroom match where you guys fought in the bathroom.
Yeah.
It's one of your most famous matches. Thoughts on that feud?
He was one of the most intense guys, probably the most intense guy I ever worked with. He could do anything. I mean, the bathroom match was intense. I had a match with him in San Francisco. I had a match with him that was similar, but nothing like the bathroom match. And there was a spot, if you watch it, where he wanted to put my head down the toilet. I said no. And he caught on right away, no, because we would have made it gaga, made it funny then. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he was smart enough, even at that stage of the business, to understand, oh, he's right. You know, a lot of guys would have said later on, why didn't you let me do it? He knew. He just said, yeah, you're right, that was not the thing to do. He was an intense performer, and, you know, he was one of the best.
I guess that must have been awkward a little bit, wrestling him with everything that happened, I guess, with your wife.
Well, people don't, you know, the thing is, my friends know this, we weren't living together for 8 months.
Okay.
So, I didn't think I knew she was going to end up with somebody, because I wasn't going to be staying there. And I didn't know it was going to be Chris. You know, he had a 2-week-old baby when this thing all transpired. But
with another woman.
with his wife,
With
yeah.
his wife, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, I
and
didn't
that's how-
know he had a kid. With
2 kids.
Oh.
So,
Well, I guess that wife got easy, just getting cheated on.
it's probably the thing that sticks out about wrestling, that everybody still, it still hurts everybody, because I think about this. I had a sister-in-law die just recently. When you lose someone close to you, I always think of her mother and father, but I've seen, we mentioned this, Benoit's father. You know, you can see the pain and grief. That's a hard thing to carry the rest of your life.
I guess Nancy, there was a restraining order of some type filed for or applied for shortly before the incident occurred.
You know, at that period, I was so far removed from the rest of the business. I was living in the Keys. I had the gym. I hadn't gone out and done anything. And I remember Teddy Long calling me and telling me. And I was shocked. I was shocked. So I didn't know what was going on in their lives. So I can't surmise what happened. But it's a tragedy because, you know, it's a human life, and the people that are gone, can never come back. But the people that were left, Benoit's other children, Benoit's ex-wife, his mother, his father, Nancy's sister, who can't have children, that means her mother and father can never have grandkids. It's a tough thing. It's a tough thing.
And the horror that the poor child would have gone through that night was just unimaginable. That's why I don't understand the people that still stick up for him, because that's a pretty monstrous thing to do.
It's a monstrous thing to do, but some of us want to believe our heroes are heroes, not human beings, and anything can happen to people, I think.
Yeah.
Sometimes people, we don't know if drugs were involved, alcohol, somebody snapped.
Well, we do know he was on a lot of drugs. He was on a lot of, because it was found in his house, and it was clear that he was on a lot of steroids by his body, the way his body looked, and by this stuff that was found in his house, I guess. What about all these fools out there that claim that you're somehow the true culprit?
Well, it's this way. Conspiracy theory people, and I believe there's some conspiracies, but because he was such a fabulous wrestler, you don't want to believe it. You know, you want to look at something else. And the one that gets me is, well, he's in the Church of Satan. Come on. I go to church. I'm a Catholic. I go to church on Sundays and discuss shit with my priest. But if they have to believe it, it doesn't bother me, because maybe that's how they sleep at night. Maybe they don't want to see their hero as what that happened. It's a horrible thing.
And as you also mentioned, you explained it well, but you were broken up, where you weren't living together with her for 8 months,
Yeah.
and this death occurred years later,
Yeah.
and why would you have anything to do with the kid?
Yeah.
Like, but yeah, that's a terrible tragedy. And just the final thing on Benoit, I guess you lost your, I guess, retirement match to Benoit.
Yeah.
I guess that was so you could focus on booking.
Right. And I wanted to do it for him.
Oh, and one more thing about Benoit. Then this, I am a great admirer of yours, but the one thing I never understood why you did was
Give him the belt?
yeah.
I'll tell you why I gave him the belt. David Penzer came to me and said they're upset. I said, I'd be upset if I was talented as them. I said, I'm going to put the belt on Sid, top of Sid tonight, and put it on Benoit, and we're going to see how he does. But for some reason, I had this thought in my head, what if I'm just walking into a trap? That's why I had Sid when I mean, people always say, well, why don't they do this and why they don't do that, right? Go tell Sid Vicious he's losing a 5'7" guy. Sid looked at me and said, this is the wrong thing to do, but because it's you, I'll do it. And I gave Sid the finish first, and I said, Sid, do me a favor. When he puts the face lock on you, make sure your foot is underneath the ropes so I get an out. And you could never see it during the match, but I had another camera on it, so, you know, if you could go back in history and reverse things, it'd be great. But we'll never know what caused it, and again, it's the sadness of it, and I understand why people reach for stuff because they can't believe somebody that they admire would do something.
And just about those 4 guys that allegedly they were worried you weren't going to push them, I think you gave Perry Saturn the best push of his career. He was probably best remembered for his WCW push. Eddie Guerrero had a great run in WCW. Dean Malenko was most over in WCW, so...
And we were putting the belts on Dean, the tag belts on Dean and Perry the following week. And I had made Eddie the first Cruiserweight champion and the U.S. champion at the same time. People forget that. I wanted to elevate the Cruiserweight that they could wrestle heavyweights. Like years ago in boxing, the light heavyweight champion almost always fought the heavyweight champion. So,
of course, probably the biggest star to come out of WCW that was made by WCW was Goldberg, without question.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the role you played in creating him?
I beat him the first night out when he had a red jacket, Falcons thing, Falcons, red tights, red boots. I beat him.
Was that on Nitro?
Yep, with Steve McMichaels. And I said, whoa, what a mistake you just did. I pulled Paul Orton off the side, and Paul ran the power plant. I said, I'm pulling this kid off the TV for 8-10 weeks. This is your project. I'll drop him because the power plant was in our building at the time. And then this is when Tyson retired. And you remember when Tyson used to go to the ring with the short boots? Just a towel. I recreated a badass in my head that was the Jewish Mike Tyson. And he got over like gangbusters. I mean, the night that he beat Hogan, it was free TV. We did over $1 million gate in Atlanta, 43,000 people there. Amazing, amazing. You know, short time he was in the business. And then he came back after 12 years and had a run with Brock.
Yeah. Which was very successful, to say the least. And one thing I noticed is that in his match with Kevin Owens, there was no offense in Kevin Owens, and I'm wondering if that has something to do too with Goldberg not feeling it would be believable for a fat guy in a t-shirt to do anything to him. I wonder if that had any role in it.
You brought up a very good point. That could be in Bill's head too.
His look is never going to translate to the mainstream fans. because like MMA fighters don't fight in t-shirts.
Yeah.
He doesn't look like an athlete. You couldn't say you're a wrestling fan and kind of be proud with him as a representative if you're an average person like a jock or a sports fan. But I'm just wondering, would a guy with that look even have had a chance as a enhancement guy in WCW?
I think that we've taken the step so far to entertainment that they are trying, in my estimation, to create wrestling entertainment people, meaning the fans. They don't want people to remember wrestling. I think we're getting so far away from it that I saw where somebody just recently, they said they had a 5-star match on a pay-per-view. It was no Ric Flair or Ricky Steamboat. It was a good match, but it wasn't 5 stars. And we'll keep on going further and further down that road where what was not acceptable in my era is the norm now. Everybody wearing t-shirts, everybody wearing jeans. It's an oddity to see guys in boots and tights. And I'm saying, how far do we get away from it? And if you were starting a company, I think the successful thing would be to go back to tights and boots. You know what I mean? But you could, and that's what I think separated Mick Foley, was he was the only guy that had that t-shirt on.
Yeah, and he also had a wild character.
Yeah, but now they all have t-shirts on.
Yeah.
So it's like, in my head, there's got to be a big plan that they are saying, well, we keep on doing this, we keep on doing this. We
Make
don't
them look as average as possible.
Yeah, we don't have to have the 6'3", 250-pound looking athlete, because some of them are going MMA, some of them are going to other sports. The boxing's getting hot again. So we got to create a pool of talent, and I think that's what's going on there. I think you're right.
But it's interesting that Goldberg has a phenomenal body and he's still Drew. Brock Lesnar's one of their top guys, phenomenal body.
Yeah,
So.
but less and less guys have the phenomenal body. But I'm with you about this. That's why Goldberg and Brock draws, because they look like the closest thing to MMA. Jericho has drawn a lot of money. He doesn't wrestle with a shirt on. I think there's a thing that guys with wearing shirts have to overcome. And I think what I said is, I think this is a plan for them that they have decided. We're going to take the talent, that guys that can perform. We were once body crazy, now we're trying to get performance crazy. And somewhere we've lost the middle.
Yeah. And the other the thing about the shirts, one thing I don't understand with Roman Reigns, I guess they've recreated the Shield now, but he's got a great physique.
I don't understand.
So if they wanted to make him over and like, he is over, but bring him to that next level, put him in something that shows off his physique.
And I happened to have the TV on one day, and a lady that is a friend of ours came by, and she went like, her head swiveled. She's like 32 years old. Her head swiveled and said, "Is he an actor too? He's a handsome kid. You know, he's half Samoan, half Italian. Why he has that vest, I have no idea. I mean, maybe he doesn't, maybe he wears the Brock shooter shorts, you know what I mean? Or, but he should be showing that body like his cousin does, right?
Yeah.
The Rock. I mean, there isn't a movie The Rock doesn't have a shirt off in, right?
Yeah. No, that's bizarre. And for Bret Hart coming to WCW, that was kind of a wasted situation. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that was another one of Hogan stiffing him. I wanted him to come in with the ring during Sting and Hogan when he first got there, and Sting have Hogan beat and go in and kick Sting. Sting have Hogan and the Stinger have Bret kick Sting. Sting would get disqualified, right? I mean, kick Hogan. Sting gets disqualified. And him saying, "You're not beating him until I beat him." I told Hogan that. He said, "This guy used to do jobs for me in handicap matches. You got something else?" He still saw Bret with Neidhart doing handicap matches. You know the famous story with Bret, "That's what you thought you heard"?
Yeah.
He had a lot of issues with people, you know. The finger poke of doom. Everybody blames Nash. He didn't want to work with Nash.
Hogan didn't want to work with Nash? No.
He didn't want to wrestle Nash. He liked working with him, but that's the easiest way to get the belt, right? Isn't that like saying, you know, you're the man? That's what they did. And, you know, we talk about Randy had a problem with, Piper had a problem with. Bret comes out and talks about it all the time that he had a problem with. There were certain people that Hogan looked at as below him, and Bret was one of them.
And what led to you being taken out of the booking committee in WCW?
Well, when Russo and Ed Ferrara came in, they brought me in as like an observer, and I went to JJ and I said, "If you watch the show, it looks like a sitcom." So when they sent them home, they had a meeting, and Brad Siegel said to me and JJ, "How are you going to turn this around next week?" And I proceeded to tell them, "Well, we need to get Goldberg back on his feet. They turned him heel. We need to make him a killer. We need to bring up some of these younger guys, blah, blah, blah." He said, "That's not going to be good enough. It's not going to be a week." I had just signed my contract. I went home for 3 years and got paid.
And what are your thoughts on the Vince Russo debacle in WCW?
Here's the one that gets me. When Dusty put the belt on him, there was a stink, right? When anybody that booked put a belt on themselves, there was a stink. Russo won the world title. I didn't hear anybody complain. You know, they kind of went along with it for a while. And then we have, and I understand what he was doing, shock TV. But you can't take it to that level. I think that was what started to chip away with the business.
And what did you think of that angle with him and Jeff Jarrett and Hulk Hogan in Daytona Beach?
That was a work. They knew what they were going to do. Yeah. Jeff didn't want to do a job for them. And then Russo went and cut that promo, but they had worked it out early, and I got that right from Jimmy Hart.
And what are your thoughts on Jeff Jarrett? Vince Russo obviously loved the guy.
Yeah, I like Jeff, but at that time, there was so much talent there. How could I justify, you know, he wanted to be world heavyweight champion. How could I justify him beating Goldberg, who was half-assed, you know, people half-assed believed him was legit. How could Jeff have beaten him with a guitar? You know, how they beat him that night with the taser and the handcuffs and all this shit. I begged them. Here's the finish I came up with. If you're going to beat him, and I begged them not to beat him, he throws Kevin into the turnbuckle, he charges, goes to spear him, Kevin moves out of the way, he hits the post, comes back, Kevin gives him a big boot, drops a knee on his head, 1, 2, 3. I said, lose the way you've been winning, right in the middle. I mean, that was a debacle. They let the Falcons, cops, you know, tasers.
Yeah.
The only thing he didn't get hit was with the electric chair.
That was terrible. And was it around that time where you could kind of see the writing on the wall for WCW?
Yeah. JJ and I said, I came up to JJ and I said, we hit the iceberg, James. I said, we were supposed to be on watch, but we didn't have our eyeglasses in to watch. He said, what do you mean? I said, we hit the iceberg, we're taking the water, we'll go down quick. Yeah.
When when WCW was eventually sold, are you surprised that WWE bought it for such a small price?
No. Brad Siegel, the guy that was the head of the entertainment department, and Vince's lawyer were college roommates. I think the fix was in. That was 37 years of television programming.
And if Eric Bischoff's Fusen Media deal had gone through that he allegedly had to buy WCW, do you think he would have had success?
If he kept the guys that he had, because there were some smart guys there. Kevin's very smart, Scott's very smart, and there were other guys. Raven's very smart. If he had listened to the guys that had been in the trenches before, yeah, I think that they would have been successful. They might not have beaten Vince, but they'd be a viable company.
And after WCW went out of business and your contract expired, was there interest from WWE to bring you in on the creative side?
Not really. At that period, I had one short meeting with them, but it never panned out, and I went home and started a new life. I built a gym, got into the lobster business for a while, and I was out for about 8 years before I ever did anything back in the business. I did a short run with Knobs with the XWF.
And I guess the way that the WWE creative system works today, it probably wouldn't be something that you're very much interested in.
Well, because I don't think they're going to listen to reason. I think they've gone down the path so far down the road. I always talk about burning the Library of Alexandria, where they supposedly had the hidden secrets, how the pyramids were built, and how herbs curing things and all this stuff. I think they want to burn down the past, the history of wrestling, and this is the WWE universe, and you're going to like it.
They definitely create their own history in some ways, but I guess they can do that.
Yeah, history is written by the winners.
That's one of the reasons why I'm doing these interviews, to at least get a different side of history out there. And what would be the best booking advice you could give for a territory in today's day and age if they were wanted to be successful as a territory, someone trying to start a territory?
Well, I would find a spoke, a middle ground before you start putting spokes. I would find a town that drew and make that your center and then branch out this way. But they're selling, we'll say they're selling Lincolns, sell Harley Davidsons. They're selling entertainment, go back to more sports orientated.
And I guess you had a little run in Ring of Honor. We don't really get it in Canada, so yeah. I didn't see much of it other than a promo that's on the internet. What was your relationship with them all about?
Well, Steve Carino at one time I thought was going to get the book. They came to me and asked me. Steve was a Dusty fan and a fan of mine, I guess, and he wanted to recreate the angle with Lou and me and Curtis, where he was going to play my role, I was going to play Curtis's role, and BJ and Lewis was going to play Mark's role. So it was a good idea, but Steve went on to greener pastures. It's time for me to go.
The wrestling scene in Japan is not at all what it used to be. What do you think the future is for wrestling there? New Japan's doing well, but there's not a lot of other options out there.
Yeah, and I think that we're going, if New Japan slips, they'll be off TV too, and they'll be laid dormant, and then someone will eventually say in the television land, hey, let's try wrestling again. And if someone goes back, and I'm not saying go back to the past, you got to give them, and people say, oh, everybody does flips and flops. That's not true. but there's a place for that. But you got to get back, especially in a culture that way. You're going to have to go back to give them something that looks like a sport. Now, I've seen some of the main event matches, and it was incredible matches. And they got a very great basic thing. But if they lose TV, they're all in trouble over there. And I think it will lay dormant until maybe 2 or 3 years. And maybe it should. Maybe it should. So that people will be hungry to see wrestling on TV again.
And one guy I'm just going to go back to and ask you about, because I forgot to ask you about him earlier, even though you brought up the incident with him and Brody, was Lex Luger was always rumored to have a real attitude issue. How was he to deal with?
I happen to like Lex, but he was very intellectual. And I think he was insecure in some ways, and it came over his arrogance. And then, he had that tragedy with Elizabeth. And for me, I was there when they started him in Florida, and he was easy for me to get along with. But I saw as he progressed, he had his own little clique of guys. He didn't expand, in the dressing room was him, Sting, and Buff, and the Steiners sometimes, but he never encompassed everybody. He was standoffish, and I don't think it was arrogance. I think it was insecurity.
And speaking of Buff, what were your thoughts on him?
I thought Buff was very talented, looked like $1 million, you know what I mean? At that time, at first I wasn't for the hat, but then I remember Dusty making promos with that hat, you know what I mean? I would have liked to have had the hat without the spray paint. That spray paint to me looks, like graffiti against the wall. It just doesn't work. And he's a talented guy. He looked like $1 million.
And Scott Steiner, we've used him quite a few times in our company, and he was going a little crazy towards the end in WCW though.
Yeah.
With some of his promos.
I think he was frustrated too, you know what I mean? It was frustrating. And Rick burnt him in a match one time, years and years ago, the first match they ever had for the title. I'm talking about 89.
Oh, Ric Flair, yeah.
Yeah, 89, where he blew the kid up because Flair was in such great ring shape. And Scott never forgave him for that. And he has a point, Rick was supposed to make the kid look good, and he didn't. And there's a lot of frustration in the wrestling business, and we know we're dealing with all kinds of personalities, and Scott has a short fuse. He ran a guy over, right? In Georgia, didn't he? A guy.
I haven't heard that story, but...
Remember the guy that was working on the road and told him to stop? Bumped into the guy.
I'm gonna have to look that one up.
But he bumped into a guy. But I mean,
I know there was some. I think Rick told us about it in his shoot interview. Something, there was a restraining order against Hogan for something recently.
Oh yeah, he threatened. He went and saw Hogan's wife. He didn't threaten Hogan's wife. He told his wife that he was going to beat Hogan up, and WWE got a restraining order against him.
I'm not sure if you have any social media or not.
I don't.
So if there is someone claiming to be you out there, it's
yeah. There's 4 of them out there claiming to be me. And then after that happened, the 4. There was actually 5. Now there's 4. I said, I'm not going to get into this conference. And one of them does me perfectly. He mimics my talk perfectly. How I would talk, right? And this, but. I don't know how you shut them down. I've asked people to shut them down, and they shut down, they pop back up, or another one pops back up. So I guess I take it as a compliment if they want to imitate me.
As long as they're not getting you in any trouble.
Yeah.
No, that's weird. And finally, where do you see the future of wrestling? Because it seems that WWE is a very stale product overall right now. They do pull off fantasy matches here and there, but those seem to be like more banned. Of course, they're healthy as a company. They're expanding. They have lots of revenue streams, but for instance, they're not going to Madison Square Garden every month.
Right.
I don't even know if they're selling out Madison Square Garden when they go there 2 or 3 times a year.
I don't know if they are either. I think that there will be a revolution of guys like you're running in Ottawa. I've mentioned PCW in LA, of Defy in Seattle. There was a group, American Wrestling Entertainment in Virginia, 1,700 people. I'm starting to see there's a backlash. People want to see a different product. And I think if someone came along with some money and got the talent, like you got an amateur background and you're a professional now, and you got some guys like that, and mixed in some Hispanic wrestling and a couple of Japanese wrestling, and gave them a little bit of everything and had money, you'd have people flock into the building for the alternative program.
Finally, to close this off, is there any message you want to give to your fans that have sat through this for 3 hours?
I don't know how you did it, 3 hours, my attention span, but it was great to do this, and I got to be able to tell you what I think, and hopefully that you learned something from this, and I appreciate it. I really do.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure hearing all your stories.
Great, thank you.